The morning sun broke over the Wyoming Badlands like a promise nobody asked for. Jack Morrison stood alone on the ridge, his breath clouding in the October air, the weight of his grandfather's rifle familiar in his hands. The M40A1 had been old when his grandfather carried it through the desert sands of Iraq in 1991. Now, restored and maintained with religious devotion, it felt like holding history itself. He chambered an imaginary round, the bolt action smooth as silk despite 3 decades of hard use. Through the scope, the empty prairie stretched for miles, sagebrush and rock formations casting long shadows in the dawn light. This land had shaped 3 generations of Morrison men. His great-grandfather had homesteaded here after the First World War. His grandfather had learned to shoot here before shipping off to the Persian Gulf. His father had taught him the fundamentals here, though the lessons had been wrapped in bitterness Jack only understood years later. One shot, one kill. His grandfather's voice echoed across the decades, teaching a boy who would become a man who would become a Marine. But know what you're killing for, Jackie. That matters more than the shot itself. Jack lowered the rifle and looked at his hands. 48 hours from now, these hands would hold different steel, peer through different glass, and make decisions that would echo through hundreds of lives. But he didn't know that yet. Right now, he was just a man trying to hold together pieces of a life that kept slipping through his fingers. The drive back to town took 20 minutes through country that hadn't changed in 100 years. His truck was 12 years old, held together by habit and stubbornness, much like the man driving it. The lawyer's office sat on Main Street between the hardware store and the diner where his grandfather used to buy him chocolate shakes. Jack had loved those shakes, had loved the way the old man would ruffle his hair and tell stories about places with names like Basra and Kuwait City, making war sound like adventure instead of the meat grinder it really was. The waiting room smelled like old carpet and broken promises. Jack sat with his hands clasped, the divorce papers on the table in front of him, looking somehow both insignificant and world-ending. 15 years of marriage reduced to 30 pages of legal language. Sarah walked in 10 minutes later, looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She didn't meet his eyes. The lawyer, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 30, guided them through the process with practiced efficiency. Sign here. Initial there. Dividing up a shared life like splitting a check at dinner. The house would go to Sarah. The truck was his. The savings account, never substantial, would be split evenly. The kids would stay with their mother. That was the part that hollowed him out. Emma, 12 years old with his mother's eyes and a heart he'd somehow managed to break despite loving her more than his own life. And Jacob, 9, who had stopped looking at him 6 months ago, as if his father had become transparent, a ghost haunting their family photos. When it came time to sign the final papers, Jack's hand hesitated over the line. Sarah noticed. She'd always noticed everything. "Jack," she said quietly. It was the first word she'd spoken directly to him in 40 minutes. "Please, don't make this harder." He signed. The pen scratching across paper sounded like surrender. They walked out into the parking lot together for the last time as husband and wife. Sarah's car was parked 3 spaces from his truck. She stopped, turned to face him, and for a moment he saw the girl he'd married, the one who had waited for him through 4 deployments, the one who had held him when the nightmares got bad, the one who had finally stopped holding him when she realized the nightmares would never end. "The kids wanted to say goodbye," she said. They were in the back seat. Emma pressed against the window, her face carrying emotions no 12-year-old should have to manage. Jacob stared at his hands, his small shoulders carrying weight he was too young to understand. Jack walked to the car, tapped on the window. Emma rolled it down an inch. "Hey, baby girl." "Hi, Daddy." The distance in those 2 words could have swallowed the sun. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt small, inadequate. "For everything, for not being there, for not knowing how to be what you needed." Emma's chin trembled. She was trying so hard to be strong, and it broke something in him that was already shattered. "You were never there," she said. The quiet words hit harder than any bullet. "Even when you were home, you weren't really here. You were always somewhere else, somewhere we couldn't follow." "I know. Why didn't you care about us?" The question hung in the air between them. The premise was wrong, but the feeling behind it was true. He had cared. God, he had cared so much it hurt. But caring and showing it were different languages, and he'd never learned to translate between them. "I do care," he managed. "I've always cared. I just didn't know how to show you." Emma looked away. Jacob still hadn't looked up. Sarah touched his arm. Jack, you need to let them go. She was right. She was always right. That was part of the problem. He stepped back from the car, watched Sarah drive away with his children, his former life, his last connection to the man he'd been before the Marine Corps had forged him into something useful and broken. The taillights disappeared around the corner, and Jack stood in the parking lot alone, feeling the weight of every decision that had led him to this moment. His phone buzzed. A text from Carlos Mendoza, the only man who truly understood what lived behind Jack's eyes. Hermano, don't do anything stupid. I know today's the day. Call me. Jack pocketed the phone without responding. Carlos meant well. Carlos always meant well. But some abysses you had to stare into alone. The drive to the base took 3 hours. Jack spent them in silence. The radio off, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the thoughts he'd been trying to outrun for 16 years. 127 confirmed kills. That was his official count, the number they wrote down in the books and whispered about in sniper school. 127 human beings who had woken up on the last morning of their lives not knowing that a man they'd never meet was about to make a split-second decision that would end their story. The first one had been a kid, 16, maybe 17 years old, in the Helmand province with an RPG on his shoulder and murder in his eyes. Jack had been 22 himself, fresh from sniper school, convinced of his own immortality and the righteousness of his cause. Through the scope, he'd seen the kid's face, saw the determination, saw the fear underneath it, saw the moment of decision when the kid hefted the RPG toward a convoy carrying 8 Marines who had families and futures and no idea death was tracking them. Jack had squeezed the trigger. The kid had dropped. The Marines had lived. And every night since, Jack had seen that face. 16 years old, give or take. Dead before he could become 17. Dead because Jack Morrison had been faster, better trained, and on the side that history would probably remember as right, though the kid's mother wouldn't see it that way. 1 shot, 1 kill. But the kill never stopped. It echoed. It multiplied. 127 faces that showed up in dreams, in reflections, in the eyes of his own children when they looked at him and saw something they couldn't name but instinctively feared. The base appeared on the horizon like a city of purpose in a desert of doubt. Camp Pendleton sprawled across the Southern California coast, home to 40,000 Marines and the machinery of America's expeditionary force. Jack had spent the better part of his adult life here, in one capacity or another. This place was more home than any house had ever been, which said something profound about his priorities and nothing good about his soul. He parked in the lot outside the barracks and sat for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to summon the energy to move. The deployment briefing was in 40 minutes. This would be his last mission. 16 years, 4 combat tours, and enough medals to prove he was good at his job, and enough scars to prove the job was bad for him. After this, he was done. Retired. Free to become a civilian and figure out what the hell a man like him did in a world without clear enemies and rules of engagement. Carlos found him there, staring through the windshield at nothing. The passenger door opened. Carlos slid into the seat, bringing with him the scent of coffee and the easy confidence of a man who had made peace with his demons, or at least negotiated a working relationship with them. You look like hell, hermano. Sign the papers today. Carlos was silent for a moment. He understood the weight of that statement. How are the kids? Emma asked why I didn't care about them. Jacob wouldn't even look at me. That's rough. Yeah. You going to be okay for this mission? Jack finally turned to look at his friend. I'm always okay for the mission, priest. It's everything else I can't figure out. That's what worries me. The mission's the easy part for you. Yeah, well, 1 more, then I'm out. Then I can start working on the hard stuff. Carlos didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Come on, Rebecca's going to start the briefing whether we're there or not, and she gets pissy when people are late. The briefing room was standard military issue. White walls, fluorescent lighting that turned everyone vaguely corpse-like, a podium at the front, and rows of chairs filled with Marines in various stages of attention. Jack took a seat in the back, old habit. Carlos sat next to him. Up front, Captain Rebecca Hayes was setting up her presentation with the focused intensity of someone who believed PowerPoint slides could win wars. She was 32, MIT graduate, daughter of a tech CEO who had nearly disowned her when she'd chosen the Marines over the family business. Jack had worked with her for 6 months and found her to be brilliant, dedicated, and completely untested in the kind of chaos that turned tactical plans into suggestions and forced you to make decisions with your gut instead of your brain. The lights dimmed. The first slide appeared. Operation Samaritan, Humanitarian Corridor Security. Rebecca's voice was crisp, professional, the kind of tone that said she'd rehearsed this. Gentlemen, we have a situation developing along the southern border. Intelligence indicates a convergence of cartel activity and suspected terrorist elements in the desert corridor between Arizona and Sonora. Our mission is to provide security for a humanitarian aid convoy transporting medical supplies and food to displaced persons in the region. The next slide showed a map. Jack studied it with the practiced eye of someone who had survived by reading terrain. Canyon country, high ridges on both sides of a narrow valley, limited egress routes. Perfect place for an ambush if someone was so inclined. 480 Marines will be deployed, Rebecca continued. 4 rifle companies plus support elements. The convoy consists of 40 vehicles. Timeline is 72 hours from initial deployment to mission completion. A hand went up. Lieutenant Marcus Daniels, West Point graduate, 28 years old and so eager to prove himself, he practically vibrated with it. Captain, what's the threat assessment? Current intelligence suggests moderate risk. Cartel elements are known to operate in the area, but recent activity has been minimal. We have air support on standby and satellite coverage for the duration. Jack's internal alarm system, honed by 16 years of things going sideways, started pinging. Minimal activity meant nothing. Minimal activity could mean they'd moved elsewhere. It could also mean they were being quiet on purpose. Rebecca cycled through more slides. Logistics, communication protocols, rules of engagement. The usual alphabet soup of military planning that looked perfect on a screen and dissolved into chaos the moment actual humans with actual weapons started making actual decisions. Sniper teams, Rebecca said, and Jack sat up straighter. We'll have 3 teams providing overwatch. Team 1, that's myself, Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, and Lance Corporal Torres. We'll establish positions on the northern ridge overlooking the primary route. Jack glanced around the room and found Miguel Torres 3 rows ahead. 21 years old, first-generation Mexican-American, and so new to the sniper school, he still had that shine that combat hadn't yet scoured away. The kid had skills, good eye, steady hand, and the kind of earnest determination that made Jack's chest tight with the memory of his own younger self. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes. Details stacked upon details, contingencies and backup plans and scenarios that assumed the enemy would cooperate with American notions of how warfare should be conducted. Finally, Rebecca shut down the projector and turned on the lights. Questions? A dozen hands went up. Jack kept his down. He'd learned long ago that the answers to the questions that mattered never came from briefings. Afterward, Marines filed out in clusters, talking tactics and gear, and the usual pre-deployment mixture of bravado and anxiety. Jack lingered, waiting for the room to clear. Carlos waited with him. Rebecca was packing up her laptop when she noticed them. Gunny Morrison, Staff Sergeant Mendoza, something I can help you with? That canyon, Jack said without preamble. You see the terrain? Of course. I've studied every topographical map we have. Studied isn't the same as seen. Those ridges are perfect for overwatch, which means they're perfect for anyone who wants to set up on us. Rebecca's expression tightened slightly, the look of someone who didn't appreciate having their preparation questioned. Our intelligence indicates minimal hostile presence in the area. Intelligence has been wrong before. Do you have specific information that contradicts the assessment? I have 16 years of watching situations that looked minimal turn into shitstorms. That canyon's a funnel. We go through there, we're committed. No easy way out if things go bad. Your concern is noted, Gunny, but the mission parameters are set. We have air support, satellite coverage, and overwhelming force. We'll be fine. The confidence in her voice was the confidence of someone who had never watched a plan survive first contact with reality. Jack wanted to push harder, but he'd been in the Marines long enough to know the difference between offering professional input and insubordination. Yes, ma'am, he said. Carlos walked with him back to the barracks. Neither spoke until they were outside, the California sun warm on their faces despite the October date. She's not wrong about the numbers, Carlos said carefully. 480 Marines is a substantial force. Numbers don't mean anything if you're in the wrong position. We learned that in Fallujah. We also learned that sometimes you have to trust the people in charge. Jack stopped walking, looked at his friend. You remember Ramadi? 2006? That staff officer who wouldn't listen when we told him the building was rigged? Carlos's face went still. 15 dead, I remember. That officer's name was Richard Sutton. He made colonel 3 years ago. Want to guess who signed off on this mission's operational plan? Jack, that was 15 years ago. People learn, people change. Some people do. Some people just get better at covering their ass when the bodies start stacking up. They resumed walking. The barracks loomed ahead, temporary home to men who had made a profession of controlled violence. Jack's room was on the third floor, a 10 by 12 space that contained everything he owned that mattered. The grandfather's rifle in its case, a photo of his kids from 2 years ago, back when they still smiled when they saw him, a Bible his mother had given him that he'd never read but couldn't bring himself to throw away. "You want to grab dinner?" Carlos asked. "Talk things through?" "I'm okay, priest. Just need to get my head straight before we roll out." Carlos studied him with the eyes of someone who had known him long enough to recognize the lies. "Don't do anything stupid with a bottle tonight, hermano. We need you sharp." "I'm always sharp. That's not what I'm worried about." After Carlos left, Jack sat on his bunk and pulled out the rifle case, opened it slowly, reverently. The M40A1 lay nestled in foam like a relic in a shrine. Serial number 367891, 63 kill marks carved into the stock by his grandfather's hand, each one representing a life ended and, according to the old man's journals, a Marine life saved. Jack ran his fingers over the marks. His grandfather had been 22 when he carved the first one, had been court-martialed and dishonorably discharged at 23, had died at 57, drunk and broken and convinced he'd been a disgrace to the uniform. The memories came in fragments, the way they always did. Jack at 10 years old, finding the rifle in the attic, his father discovering him there, the rage that had followed. "Put that away. Your grandfather was no hero, but he saved people. He disobeyed orders. In the military, that's the same as treason. He died a disgrace. Don't you ever forget that." His mother's voice, quieter but no less firm. "Your father did what he thought was right, and it cost him everything. I will not have my son make the same mistake." Jack closed the case. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Carlos, then one from Miguel. The kid wanted advice on gear selection for the mission. Jack typed out a response, keeping it simple and practical. "Bring extra water. Your spotter scope is more important than you think. Don't forget sunscreen. The small things that kept you alive while you were busy focusing on the big things that could kill you." A third text arrived, this one from a number he'd been avoiding for 3 months. "Sarah, the kids are asking about you. Emma wants to know if you're deploying again." He stared at the message for a long time. The cursor blinked in the reply field like a heartbeat. What could he say? Yes, he was deploying. Yes, he was leaving again. Yes, he was choosing the mission over them again, except it wasn't really a choice because the mission was the only thing he knew how to do right. Finally, he typed, "Tell Emma I love her. Tell Jacob too. I'll be back in a week. Maybe we can do something then." The reply came quickly. "Maybe isn't good enough anymore, Jack, but I'll tell them." He set the phone down, looked around the small room that contained his entire existence, 16 years of service, and this was what he had to show for it. A rifle that belonged to a dead man, a photo of children who could barely stand to look at him, and the certain knowledge that in 72 hours he'd be looking through a scope at people who needed to die so other people could live. One shot, one kill, but his grandfather's voice whispered the second part. But know what you're killing for. What was he killing for now? Country? Freedom? The abstract notion of protecting the homeland? Or was it simpler than that? Was he killing because killing was what he was good at, and a man needed to be good at something? The bottle of whiskey in his locker called to him. Jack had been sober for 6 days. 6 days of white-knuckling through the shakes and the dreams and the creeping certainty that the only thing keeping him from putting his own rifle in his mouth was momentum and stubbornness. He reached for the bottle, stopped. Carlos's words echoed, "We need you sharp." Jack closed the locker, laid back on the bunk, stared at the ceiling, and counted his breathing the way the therapist had taught him before he'd stopped going to therapy because talking about the problem didn't make it go away. It just gave it more words to haunt him with. Sleep came eventually, though it brought no rest. Just dreams of faces, 127 of them, and counting. The next morning arrived with the mechanical precision of military routine. 0500 wake up, 0530 formation, 0600 breakfast in the chow hall, where everything tasted like it had been designed by a committee whose only requirement was caloric density. Jack ate without tasting, Around him, Marines talked and joked and performed the rituals of young men about to walk into danger. The gallows humor, the boasting, the careful not mentioning of fear that everyone felt but nobody acknowledged. Miguel found him after breakfast. The kid was carrying his gear, already packed and organized with the fastidiousness of someone who hadn't yet learned that chaos was the natural state of combat. Gunny Morrison, you got a minute? What do you need, Torres? I wanted to ask about the rifle. You said yesterday to bring the spotter scope, but I've been reading the field manual and it says, forget the field manual. The manual was written by people who think war happens on flat ground with clear sight lines and enemies who cooperate with our expectations. Real combat is messy. The spotter scope lets you see that mess before it becomes your mess. Bring it. Miguel nodded, absorbing the information with the seriousness of a student before finals. Gunny, can I ask you something else? Shoot. How many times have you deployed? This will be my 5th. And in combat, have you ever... The kid trailed off, unable to finish the question. Jack knew what he was asking. The question everyone asked eventually, usually right before they were about to find out the answer for themselves. You want to know if I've killed people? Miguel nodded. Yeah, I have. How many? Jack considered lying, considered softening the number, considered all the ways he could frame the truth to make it sound less like what it was. 127 confirmed kills, he said instead. Give or take a few that weren't official enough to make the book. Miguel's eyes widened. That's a lot. That's 16 years of being good at my job. How do you deal with it? Jack looked at the kid, 21 years old, probably had a girl back home, probably had dreams about what he'd do after his service, probably thought he understood what he was signing up for when he volunteered for sniper school. Honestly, Torres, you don't deal with it. You carry it. Every single one. Some nights are better than others. Some nights you need help carrying, but they don't go away. The first guy I killed was about your age. 16 years later, I can still see his face clear as day. That never stops. Then why do you keep doing it? It was a fair question. Jack didn't have a fair answer. Because somebody has to. Because the guys next to me deserve to go home. Because if I'm good at one thing in this world, it's keeping my brothers alive. Even if the cost is carrying their would-be killers with me forever. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. My mom doesn't know I'm deploying. I told her it was training. Why? Because she crossed the border illegally 20 years ago. Worked 3 jobs to give me a shot at something better. I joined the Marines so I could get citizenship, bring her back legally. If something happens to me out there, before that happens, nothing's going to happen to you, Torres. You're with me. I've been doing this since before you could drive. Just do what I tell you, when I tell you, and you'll be home teaching your own kid to shoot before you know it. The kid tried to smile, didn't quite make it. Thanks, Gunny. After Miguel left, Jack spent an hour on the range, not shooting, just holding the rifle, feeling its weight, running through the fundamentals that had been drilled into him until they were deeper than thought. Breathing, sight picture, trigger control, the mechanics of ending a life from distances that turned human beings into targets and moral complexity into geometry. Rebecca showed up halfway through his meditation. She stood at the edge of the range, watching him sight down the barrel at imaginary enemies. Gunny Morrison, we need to talk. Jack lowered the rifle. Yes, ma'am. I noticed yesterday you had some concerns about the mission parameters. I have concerns every mission, Captain. Comes with the job. I need to know if those concerns are going to affect your performance. It was a fair question from a commander's perspective. It was also the wrong question. But Jack had learned long ago that explaining the difference between having concerns and being unable to do the job was a distinction most officers couldn't grasp. My performance will be what it always is, ma'am. Professional, effective. You'll get what you need from me. Rebecca studied him. She was smart enough to hear what he wasn't saying. But you still think this mission is a mistake. I think the terrain is bad. I think the intelligence is thin. I think we're putting a lot of Marines in a position where the variables outnumber the certainties. But I also think I'm a gunnery sergeant and you're a captain and the decision isn't mine to make. If it was your decision, I'd send scouts first. I'd verify the intelligence on the ground. I'd have backup plans for the backup plans. But we don't have time for that, do we? No, we don't. The humanitarian situation is time sensitive. People are dying while we debate tactics. Jack didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She was right that people were dying. He was right that more might die if they moved too fast. Both things could be true. War was full of that particular flavor of impossible. I know your record, Gunny, Rebecca said. 127 confirmed kills, multiple commendations. You're one of the best snipers the Corps has. I'm counting on that. You'll have it. I'm also counting on you to tell me if you see something I'm missing. I may be in command, but you've got 16 years in the field. Your experience matters. It was a good thing to say. The kind of thing that made Jack almost believe she understood the gap between planning and reality. Almost. Appreciate that, ma'am. Rebecca turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. That rifle you carry, I've seen you with it. It's not standard issue. No, ma'am, it belonged to my grandfather. Desert Storm era. He make it home? Jack thought about his grandfather dying drunk in a VA facility, convinced he was a disgrace. Thought about his father's lifelong anger. Thought about the 63 marks carved into the stock and the 40 Marines who lived because one man decided orders mattered less than lives. In a way, he said. Rebecca nodded and walked off. Jack watched her go, then returned to the rifle. He had 36 hours before they rolled out. 36 hours to get his head straight, to push down the dreams and the doubts, to become the thing the Marine Corps needed him to be: cold, precise, effective. That night, Carlos found him in the barracks. The priest had brought food from the chow hall, not because Jack had asked, but because Carlos understood that left alone, Jack would skip meals and live on coffee and cigarettes until his body forced the issue. They ate in comfortable silence. Then Carlos spoke. You prayed lately? Not my thing, priest, you know that. I know you say that. I also know you talk to your grandfather's ghost every time you clean that rifle. That's different. How? Jack didn't have an answer. Carlos smiled. Prayer isn't about religion, hermano. It's about acknowledging there's something bigger than you, something that matters more than your own head. You don't have to call it God, but you have to call it something, or this job eats you alive. Pretty sure it already has. Nah, you're still here, still fighting, still caring enough about those Marines to question bad orders. That's not eaten alive, that's still standing. They finished eating. Carlos collected the trays. Before leaving, he put a hand on Jack's shoulder. Whatever happens out there, I got your back. Always have, always will. I know, priest. And Jack, your kids, Emma and Jacob, they don't hate you, they're just scared. Kids that age, when they don't understand something, fear looks like hate. Give it time, give them time, you'll find your way back. After Carlos left, Jack pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos. Emma at 6, gap-toothed and laughing. Jacob at 4, wearing Jack's cover and saluting with the wrong hand. Sarah, pregnant with Jacob, glowing in that way women glow when they're creating life. When had he lost them? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment? A specific deployment, a specific firefight, a specific kill that had changed something fundamental in him and made him unrecognizable to the people who loved him. He wanted to call, wanted to hear Emma's voice, even if it was angry. Wanted to tell Jacob he was sorry for being a ghost in his own life. Wanted to tell Sarah that she'd been right about everything and he should have listened years ago. Instead, he put the phone away, pulled out the rifle, began the ritual of cleaning, the meditation of maintenance, breaking down the weapon into components, cleaning each piece with practiced care, reassembling with the muscle memory of 10,000 repetitions. One shot, one kill. His grandfather's mantra. But the old man had added the crucial part. But know what you're killing for. Tomorrow, Jack would deploy. Tomorrow, he would take up position on a ridge and peer through glass at a world reduced to crosshairs and calculations. Tomorrow, he would make decisions measured in millimeters and milliseconds that would echo through lives he'd never know. But tonight, he was just a man with a rifle and a legacy of violence, trying to figure out if the thing he was good at was worth the cost of everything else he'd lost. The cleaning finished, the rifle reassembled, perfect and deadly and waiting. Just like the war, just like tomorrow, just like the choices that were coming. Jack had set the rifle aside, lay back on the bunk, closed his eyes against the ceiling in the memories, in the certain knowledge that sleep, when it came, would bring no peace. Outside, Camp Pendleton settled into its evening rhythms. 40,000 Marines preparing for tomorrow. Some would deploy, some would train, some would die in distant places for reasons that seemed clear in briefing rooms and murky in the field. And in a small room on the 3rd floor, a man who had killed 127 times tried to remember what it felt like to build something instead of destroy it. The attempt failed. It always did. But he kept trying. That had to count for something. Dawn would come soon enough. And with it, the mission. the canyon, the choices. One shot, one kill, and the long, long counting of costs that nobody taught you in sniper school, but everyone learned anyway. One face at a time, forever. The convoy rolled out at 0400 hours, 40 vehicles carrying 480 Marines, and enough humanitarian supplies to feed a small city. Jack Morrison sat in the back of an MRAP, his grandfather's rifle secured beside him, Rebecca Hayes across from him studying maps on a tablet, and Miguel Torres nervously checking his gear for the third time in 20 minutes. The desert landscape outside the armored windows looked peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. Deceptive. Jack had seen too many peaceful-looking places turn into killing fields to trust what his eyes told him. The terrain here was all wrong. Too many ridges, too many places for an enemy to hide and wait. "You're quiet, Gunny," Rebecca said without looking up from her tablet. "Thinking about the terrain. Still concerned about the canyon?" "Still concerned about everything, ma'am. It's what keeps me alive." Rebecca finally looked at him. "You've done this 4 times before. I need you confident, not paranoid. Confidence gets people killed. Paranoia keeps them breathing." Miguel glanced between them, sensing the tension, but smart enough not to insert himself into it. The kid was learning. Combat taught you when to speak and when to shut up faster than any training manual ever could. The convoy moved through the darkness, headlights off, navigating by night vision and GPS. Around them, the desert began to take shape as dawn approached. Rock formations rising from sand, dry creek beds cutting through the landscape, and ahead, the canyon, the funnel, the place where the convoy would be most vulnerable. Jack's internal alarm system, 16 years in the making, was screaming at him. Everything about this felt wrong. The intelligence that said minimal enemy activity, the confidence that overwhelming force meant safety, the assumption that speed would carry them through before anyone could organize a response. He'd seen those assumptions fail before. Ramadi, Fallujah, Kandahar. Different countries, different enemies, same result. Good Marines dead because someone at headquarters had looked at a map instead of the ground. Rebecca's radio crackled. Battalion command checking in, confirming the convoy's position, repeating the timeline. Everything by the book, everything according to plan, everything perfect on paper. The MRAP hit a pothole, and Jack's ribs sent a sharp reminder that he was getting too old for this. 38 years old, too many deployments, too many nights sleeping on hard ground, too many moments when adrenaline was the only thing keeping a body past its warranty functioning. "You okay, boss?" Miguel asked, noticing Jack's wince. "Fine, just getting old." "You're not old. Kid, when you've been doing this longer than your spotter's been alive, you're old." Miguel smiled despite his nervousness. "You don't look that old. I feel it. Every morning, every mission, every time I have to climb into one of these tin cans and trust that the intelligence is good and the plan is solid and nothing's going to go sideways." Does it ever not go sideways? Once, back in 2008. Everything went exactly according to plan. I spent the whole mission waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. Most unsettling day of my career. Rebecca was listening despite appearing focused on her tablet. "You really don't trust the system, do you, Gunny?" "I trust the Marines. I trust the training. I trust that when things go bad, good people will do what needs doing." "The system?" He shrugged. "The system's made of paper. Paper doesn't stop bullets." The canyon appeared ahead as the sun broke the horizon. Jack's first clear look at it in daylight confirmed every instinct that had been screaming since the briefing. High ridges on both sides, narrow road through the middle, perfect fields of fire for anyone positioned on the high ground. Limited egress routes if things went bad. "That's where we need to be," Rebecca said, pointing to a ridge on the northern side. "Perfect overwatch position. It's also perfect for anyone who wants to set up on us. Our intelligence says—" "I know what the intelligence says, ma'am. I'm telling you what the ground says." Their MRAP peeled off from the main convoy, heading for the ridge access road. 2 other sniper teams did the same, positioning themselves at different vantage points. The main convoy continued toward the canyon, moving at the steady pace of vehicles that believed they were safe. The climb to the ridgetop took 15 minutes. The MRAP could only go so far before the terrain became too rough. The last 100 meters they'd have to hike with full gear. Jack grabbed his rifle, Miguel gathered the spotting equipment, and Rebecca coordinated with the other teams over secure radio. The hike up was brutal, Sand and rock, steep incline, full sun, already heating the desert despite the early hour. Jack's ribs protested every step, but he pushed through. Pain was temporary. Being in position when it mattered was everything. They reached the ridge top, and Jack immediately began setting up. He'd done this so many times the movements were automatic. Rifle position, shooting mat deployed, range card started. Miguel set up the spotting scope beside him, already scanning the valley below. The view was exactly what Jack had feared and expected. The canyon stretched out beneath them, the convoy road cutting through the middle like a scar. And on the opposite ridge, among the rocks and shadows, his trained eye picked out details that didn't belong. Glints of metal, unnaturally straight lines, fighting positions. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we have a problem." Rebecca moved to his position. "What am I looking at?" "Machine gun nest, 11 o'clock. Opposite ridge, 800 meters. See the barrel catching the sun?" She looked through the spotting scope. "I see it. That's one. Miguel, scan the ridgeline. Call out anything that doesn't look natural." For the next 5 minutes, Miguel methodically scanned while Jack and Rebecca watched. The picture that emerged was damning. At least 6 machine gun nests, multiple RPG teams, sniper positions, all oriented toward the canyon road, all waiting. "Count?" Rebecca asked. "Minimum 150 fighters," Jack said. "Could be more hidden in the ravines and dead spaces. This isn't opportunistic. This is prepared. They knew we were coming." Rebecca's face went pale. She grabbed her radio. "Overwatch 1 to base. We have eyes on significant enemy force in prepared positions along the convoy route. Recommend immediate halt and reassessment." The response took a moment, then Colonel Sutton's voice, tight with annoyance. "Overwatch 1, clarify your assessment. Our intelligence indicates minimal enemy presence." "Sir, I'm looking at over 150 hostiles in fighting positions. Machine guns, RPGs, coordinated defensive arrangement. This is an ambush." "Captain Hayes, our signals intelligence shows no enemy communications in your sector. Are you certain you're not seeing civilian activity or routine security?" Jack grabbed his own radio. "Base, this is Morrison. I have clear visual on military weapons and tactical positions. These are not civilians." "Gunny Morrison, unless you have confirmation of hostile intent, you're looking at speculation. The convoy is on schedule and will proceed as planned." Rebecca looked at Jack. He could see the conflict in her eyes. The training that said trust the chain of command. The reality that said the chain of command was wrong. "Sir," she tried again, "I am requesting the convoy halt while we verify." "Negative, Overwatch 1. Intelligence assets indicate a larger threat developing north of your position. All units are ordered to execute immediate tactical withdrawal via Route Bravo 7 to avoid the northern threat." Jack felt his blood run cold. He grabbed the map, traced Route Bravo 7. It went straight through the canyon, straight through the kill zone he was looking at right now. "Ma'am," he said urgently, "Route Bravo 7 is the canyon. If they withdraw, that way they're walking into this." Rebecca keyed her radio again. "Base Route Bravo 7 takes the convoy directly through the ambush position. We need an alternate." "Captain Hayes, you are receiving a direct order. All units will execute immediate withdrawal via Route Bravo 7. Acknowledge." Down in the valley, Jack could see the convoy beginning to turn. They were following orders, heading toward death. He looked through his scope, counted the enemy positions again, calculated the mathematics of an ambush. 480 Marines and 40 vehicles moving into a kill zone covered by 150 fighters in prepared positions with crew-served weapons and high ground advantage. The math was simple and brutal. 70% casualties, maybe more. Rebecca was speaking urgently into the radio. "Sir, I have visual confirmation of the ambush. The northern threat may be a diversion. Request permission to..." "Captain Hayes, you are relieved of command if you do not comply immediately. Execute the withdrawal order. That is final." Jack watched the convoy moving, watched his brothers driving towards slaughter, because someone 200 miles away was looking at bad intelligence and making decisions based on what a map said instead of what the ground showed. He thought about his grandfather, about that moment in Iraq when the old man had faced the same choice: follow orders or save lives. His grandfather had chosen to save lives. The Corps had destroyed him for it. Jack thought about his father's words: orders are absolute. Disobedience is the same as treason. He thought about Emma asking why he didn't care, about Jacob who wouldn't look at him, about Sarah saying maybe wasn't good enough anymore. He thought about 127 faces he already carried, about whether he could carry 480 more. Miguel was watching him. The kid could see the calculation happening. "Boss, what do we do?" Rebecca lowered her radio, looked at Jack. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Two people caught between the system they'd sworn to serve and the reality that system was about to get everyone killed. Then Rebecca made a decision that would define both their careers. "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison," she said formally, "I am ordering you as on-scene commander with direct visual confirmation of enemy forces to engage hostile targets to protect Marine Corps personnel in imminent danger." Jack stared at her. "Ma'am, you're ordering me to disobey battalion?" "I'm ordering you to engage the enemy. That's what snipers do. They'll court-martial us. They'll court-martial me. I'm giving the order. You're following it." "Ma'am, Gunny, I didn't go to MIT to become an officer who watches Marines die because someone at a desk made a bad call. I see what you see. Those men down there are about to drive into a meat grinder. We can stop it, so I'm ordering you to stop it." Miguel's eyes were wide. "Captain, this is serious. I know what they'll do, Torres, but those Marines down there have families. They have futures, and I'm not going to watch them die because I was too scared to make the right call." Jack looked at her with new respect. She wasn't the untested officer anymore. She was someone willing to sacrifice her career to save her Marines. He thought about his grandfather one more time, about the 63 marks on the rifle, about 40 Marines who lived because one man decided orders mattered less than lives. "Miguel," Jack said, "get on the spotting scope. Call wind and range." "Boss, are you sure?" The captain gave an order. "We follow orders." He could hear the irony in his own voice. They were following orders, just not the ones from battalion. Rebecca got on her radio, switching to the convoy frequency. "All units, this is Overwatch 1. Danger close. Enemy contact. Hold positions. Do not proceed on route Bravo 7. Overwatch is engaging." Lieutenant Daniel's voice came back. "Overwatch 1, we have orders to..." "Belay those orders, Lieutenant. I have command authority on scene. Enemy ambush confirmed. Hold position and prepare for contact." Jack settled behind his rifle, controlled his breathing. Let 16 years of training take over. The first target was obvious. Primary machine gun nest at the mouth of the canyon. Perfect position to rake the convoy with enfilade fire. 3 men visible. Range 875 meters. Wind calm. Slight uphill angle. "Miguel confirmed target. Machine gun nest, 875 meters. Miguel's voice was steady despite the enormity of what they were about to do. "Confirmed. Wind negligible. Temperature stable. Target acquired." Jack's world narrowed to what he could see through the scope. The machine gunner was young, maybe 25, setting up his weapon with practiced efficiency. He had no idea death was tracking him from nearly a kilometer away. One shot, one kill. But know what you're killing for. Jack was killing for 480 Marines who deserved to go home. He exhaled slowly, felt his heartbeat, timed the shot between beats, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. Through the scope, he saw the machine gunner drop. The other 2 men scrambled for cover, confused, not knowing where the shot had come from. Jack had already chambered another round. The second man tried to man the gun, lived 4 seconds before Jack's bullet found him. The third abandoned the position entirely, running for cover. "Base is going crazy on the radio," Rebecca reported, one hand on her headset. "Sutton's demanding we cease fire." "Can't hear him over the sound of saving lives, ma'am." The enemy positions erupted into chaos. They'd been ready for an ambush. They hadn't been ready to be ambushed themselves. Jack shifted to the next target. Secondary machine gun position, 920 meters. The gunner was scanning the ridges, trying to find the shooter. Miguel called it. "Target acquired, 920 meters. Wind picking up, 2 miles per hour, left to right." Jack adjusted, fired, the gunner dropped. And that's when all hell broke loose. The enemy realized they were under fire, realized their perfect ambush had been compromised. They did what any military force would do. They attacked. Some toward the convoy, some trying to locate Jack's position. The neat ambush turned into a chaotic firefight. Down in the valley, Lieutenant Daniels was already reacting. Instead of driving into the kill zone, he was positioning his Marines in defensive formations, using the MRAPs for cover, setting up fields of fire, turning what would have been a turkey shoot into an actual fight. Jack worked methodically. Target selection based on threat priority. Machine gunners first, RPG teams second. Anyone trying to organize the chaos third. Each shot calculated, each kill necessary. Miguel called targets and confirmed hits with the calm efficiency of someone who trained for this but never quite believed it would be real. Until now. Now it was very real. Boss, you're at 15 kills. They're starting to figure out where we are. Good. Means they're not shooting at the guys down there. Rebecca was on multiple radio channels, coordinating with the convoy, calling for air support, ignoring the increasingly angry transmissions from Colonel Sutton, demanding she cease fire and surrender her position for disciplinary action. Air support ETA 8 minutes, she reported. That's a lifetime in a firefight, ma'am. Then make it count, Gunny. He did. 20 kills, 25, 30. Each one a human being who'd woken up this morning not knowing it was their last day. Each one someone who would have killed Marines if given the chance. The mathematics of violence. The calculations you made when the only choices were kill or watch your brothers die. Then the enemy counter-sniper found him. The bullet cracked past Jack's head, missing by 6 inches. Close enough to hear the supersonic snap. Close enough to feel the displaced air. "Sniper!" Miguel yelled, already scanning for the source. Jack rolled right, repositioning behind better cover. Another shot impacted where he'd been. Whoever was shooting at him was good. Very good. 11 o'clock, rocky outcrop, 950 meters, Miguel called. Can't get a clear visual, but that's where the shots are coming from. Jack set up in the new position, scanning the outcrop. There, a slight movement. The glint of a scope. He fired. The enemy sniper ducked. Fired back. The cat and mouse game began. For 5 minutes, Jack and the enemy sniper dueled while the larger battle raged around them. Each trying to get the killing shot. Each moving after firing to avoid the counter shot. Miguel feeding Jack information. Rebecca coordinating the chaos below. Jack saw his opening. The enemy sniper had set up a perfect position, but made one mistake. A small gap in his cover that would be exposed for maybe 2 seconds when he repositioned. Jack waited. Patient, controlled breathing, heartbeat steady. The enemy sniper moved. The gap appeared. Jack fired. Through the scope, he saw the enemy sniper slump. One less threat. But there was no time to celebrate. The enemy reinforcements were arriving. "Ma'am, we have incoming. 4 technicals with mounted 50s, about 100 dismounts, coming in from the east." Rebecca looked. The sight made her face go pale. "Can you stop them?" "Not all of them. Too many, too spread out. I can slow them down." "Then slow them down. We need those 8 minutes for air support." Jack shifted his focus to the vehicles. The mounted 50 caliber machine guns were the primary threat. Take out the gunners, the vehicles became transport instead of weapons platforms. Range was longer now, 1,200 meters plus. Harder shots, but necessary. He took the first gunner at 1,210 meters. The technical swerved but kept coming. The second gunner scrambled to man the weapon. Lived maybe 3 seconds. The third technical had a smarter gunner who kept his head down and fired blind. Less accurate, but harder to kill. Miguel was tracking everything. "Boss, you're at 43 kills. You're running low on ammo." Jack checked. 40 rounds left. He'd started with 120. That meant 80 rounds fired, 73 confirmed kills. His accuracy was good, but not perfect. Had to make every shot count now. The enemy dismounts were spreading out, using the terrain for cover, advancing in fire teams. Professional. Well-trained. This wasn't a ragtag militia. This was a military unit that knew what they were doing. "They're trying to flank us," Rebecca said, watching the enemy movement. "Get around our position and hit the convoy from behind." Jack shifted to target the flanking element. Dropped 3 fighters in quick succession. The others went to ground. Their advance stalled. But there were too many. For every one he killed, 2 more kept coming. That's when Miguel spoke the words Jack had been dreading. "Boss, contact close. We've got dismounts coming up the ridge toward our position. Maybe 30 of them. 300 meters in closing." They were out of time, out of space, out of options. Jack looked at his ammo. 37 rounds. Looked at the enemy closing on their position. Looked down at the valley where 480 Marines were fighting because he'd chosen to disobey orders. Rebecca made the call. "Gunny, we need to displace. Fall back to secondary position. If we move, we lose overwatch on the valley. If we stay, we're dead and the convoy loses overwatch anyway. Move." She was right. Jack grabbed his rifle. Miguel grabbed the spotting gear, and they began a fighting retreat along the ridge, moving, shooting, moving again. The enemy following, getting closer. 200 meters, 150. Jack could hear them now. Shouts in a language he didn't speak. The crack of AK-47 rounds impacting around them. They reached a cluster of boulders that offered some cover. Jack set up again, Miguel beside him, Rebecca coordinating on multiple radios. Air support 2 minutes out, she said. We might not have 2 minutes, ma'am. The enemy was closing. Jack could see them now without the scope. Determined, angry, coming to kill the sniper who'd shattered their ambush. He fired, dropped the lead man, fired again, dropped another, but they kept coming. 30 rounds, 25, 20. Miguel had his rifle out, the M4 carbine every Marine carried. His hands were shaking. The kid had trained for this, but training wasn't the same as having men running at you with murder in their eyes. Torres, Jack said calmly, you're going to be okay. Just breathe. Pick your targets. Aim center mass. You've got this. Boss, I know, but you're about to. When they get to 50 meters, you start shooting. Don't think about it. Just do it. We need you. The enemy was 60 meters, 55, 50. Now Miguel, shoot. Miguel opened fire. His first shots went wide, his hands shaking too badly. But Jack's calm voice guided him. Breathe, aim, fire, you're doing fine, keep shooting. Miguel's fourth shot hit. An enemy fighter dropped. The kid's eyes went wide with shock and horror. He'd just taken his first life. Stay in the fight, Torres. We celebrate or mourn later. Right now, keep shooting. They held a position for 90 seconds that felt like 90 hours. Jack with his rifle taking careful shots. Miguel with his carbine providing suppressing fire. Rebecca on the radio screaming for air support. Then the most beautiful sound in the world. The whump, whump, whump of helicopter rotors. 2 Apache attack helicopters cresting the ridge, their weapon systems locked on the enemy formations. The Apaches opened up. 30-millimeter chain guns tore into the enemy positions. Rockets streaked down to impact among the technicals. The enemy advance shattered. Those who could ran, those who couldn't died. Jack lowered at his rifle, checked his ammo. 15 rounds left. 73 confirmed kills from 105 rounds fired. The math was done. Miguel sat with his back against a boulder, his hands shaking violently, his eyes wide. Boss, I killed someone. I killed... Jack moved to sit beside him, put his hand on the kid's shoulder. I know, and I'm sorry you had to, but you saved my life. You did what needed doing. That matters. I can see his face. You'll see his face for a long time. Maybe forever. That's the kid, Bob, but we're alive. The Marines down there are alive because you stood when it mattered. Rebecca was still on the radio, but her hand was shaking too. The weight of what they'd just done hitting all of them now that the immediate danger had passed. Down in the valley, the firefight was ending. The enemy was retreating. The Marines were securing the battlefield, counting their own casualties. 8 dead, 23 the wounded. Terrible numbers, but not the 70% that would have died if they'd driven into that ambush. Jack's radio crackled. Colonel Sutton's voice, cold, furious. Overwatch 1. You are ordered to cease all operations and return to base immediately. You are under arrest for disobeying direct orders. Military police will be waiting. Rebecca looked at Jack. Jack looked at her. Miguel looked at both of them. They'd saved 500 lives, and now they were going to pay for it. Understood, base, Rebecca said quietly. Overwatch 1 complying. We're coming in. She looked at Jack. No regrets? Jack thought about the 73 new faces he'd carry, about the court-martial waiting, about his career ending in disgrace like his grandfather's, about Emma and Jacob who'd seen news coverage of their father being arrested. No regrets, ma'am. Those Marines are alive. That's what matters. Even if we go to prison? Even then. They began the long walk back to the MRAP. Behind them, the valley was secure. Ahead of them, consequences waited. But for now, in this moment, 480 Marines were breathing who wouldn't have been. 1 shot, 1 kill, 73 times over. And every single one of them worth it. The helicopter blades beat against desert air, each rotation a mechanical counting of heartbeats. Jack Morrison sat strapped into the medevac chopper, his body present, but his mind still on that ridge, still calculating wind drift and bullet drop, still seeing 73 faces through a scope that reduced human beings to geometry. Beside him, Miguel Torres lay on a stretcher, his leg wrapped in field dressing, already dark with blood. The kid's eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the helicopter's ceiling like he might find answers written there. Around them, other wounded Marines sat in various states of damage. A corporal with burns on his arms, a sergeant with shrapnel wounds across his back, a young private holding pressure on a through and through in his thigh. They were the lucky ones. They'd live. Jack pressed his hands flat against his thighs, trying to stop the tremors that had started the moment he'd stopped shooting. His body was finally catching up with what his brain had been doing for 40 minutes. 127 kills had become 200. 73 new additions to the catalog of faces that would visit him in the dark hours before dawn. The corpsman moved through the cramped space, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, offering words of comfort that everyone pretended to believe. When he reached Jack, he paused. "Gunny, you need to lie down. Those ribs need medical attention." "I'm fine sitting." "You have at least 3 broken ribs and probable internal bleeding. You're not fine." "I said I'm fine, Doc." The corpsman knew better than to argue with a gunnery sergeant who just saved 500 Marines. He moved on to the next patient. Jack returned to staring at nothing, his hands still shaking despite his best efforts at control. Miguel's voice cut through the rotor noise. "Boss." Jack turned to look at the kid. "You saved 500 people today. I killed 73 to do it. They were trying to kill us." "Doesn't make it easier, kid. It never does." Miguel opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was about to say got lost in the sudden descent as the helicopter dropped toward Camp Pendleton. Through the open door, Jack could see the base sprawling across the California coast. Home. If you could call a place home when it had been bought with other people's blood. The landing was smooth, professional. The crew chief slid the door fully open, and California heat rushed in to replace the manufactured wind. Medical personnel waited on the tarmac, ready to receive the wounded. But behind them, standing in formation that spoke of official business rather than welcome, were 2 military police officers flanking a young lieutenant whose face carried all the enthusiasm of a man about to do something he disagreed with but had been ordered to do anyway. The wounded were offloaded first, Miguel on his stretcher, protesting that he could walk. The burn corporal helped by 2 medics, the others limping or being carried toward the waiting ambulances. Jack climbed out last, his movements careful, each breath sending sharp reminders through his damaged ribs that his body had limits even if his mission hadn't acknowledged them. The MP lieutenant approached, his posture military correct, his eyes apologetic. "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, Captain Hayes, you are under arrest pending court-martial for willful disobedience of lawful orders in a combat zone." The words hit the assembled Marines like artillery. Angry murmurs rippled through the formation. Someone shouted from the back. "They saved our lives," another voice joined. "This is bullshit." Lieutenant Marcus Daniels pushed through the crowd, his left arm bandaged, blood visible through the gauze. His West Point precision had been replaced by something raw. "On whose authority?" "Colonel Sutton's direct orders, Lieutenant. Colonel Sutton's orders would have killed us all." "That's not for me to determine, sir. I have my orders." The irony of that statement settled over everyone like smoke. Following orders. The thing Jack and Rebecca had refused to do. The thing that would have filled the valley with American dead. Rebecca appeared from a second helicopter, escorted by another MP. Her uniform was torn, a cut above her right eye from when RPG fire had rained shrapnel across their position. But she walked with her spine straight, her chin level, her eyes carrying the calm of someone who'd made peace with consequences before they arrived. She met Jack's gaze across the tarmac. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They'd made their choice together. Now they'd face the cost together. Carlos Mendoza stepped forward from the crowd, his face dark with controlled fury. "This is wrong." The MP lieutenant looked uncomfortable but held his ground. "Staff Sergeant, step back. They're heroes. They saved 500 Marines. Step back, Staff Sergeant. That's an order." Carlos didn't move. The tension stretched thin enough to snap. Then Jack spoke, his voice carrying despite the exhaustion that weighed on every syllable. "Stand down, priest. This is how it works." "That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it necessary. We knew what we were doing." The MPS led them away from the landing zone, away from the Marines who'd survived because 2 people had decided reality mattered more than radio transmissions from officers who couldn't see the battlefield. They were separated immediately. Jack to one holding cell, Rebecca to another. The room they put him in was small, concrete walls painted institutional beige, a metal bench, a door with a wire-reinforced window. Jack sat and let the shaking take over. Without the mission to focus on, without the immediate need to perform, his body acknowledged what he'd put it through. His hands trembled badly enough that he had to clasp them together. His breathing came shallow and fast, each intake sending pain through damaged ribs that screamed for attention he didn't have time to give. The faces started coming. Not just the 73 from today, all 200. A slideshow of the dead playing across the inside of his eyelids every time he blinked. The Taliban teenager from Helmand, the sniper from Fallujah who'd almost killed him first, the machine gunner in Ramadi, the boy who couldn't have been more than 14, carrying an AK-47 too big for his frame. And the new ones, 73 fresh additions, some he'd seen clearly through his scope. The machine gunner at 875 meters, the RPG team leader at 920, the spotter at 1,050. Others had been distant shapes, targets reduced to calculations and trigger pulls. But they'd all been human. They'd all had mothers. They'd all had last thoughts that probably weren't about glory, but about the simple desire to keep breathing. The door opened. Carlos stood there with 2 cups of terrible coffee. The MP behind him looked annoyed but didn't stop him from entering. 2 minutes, Staff Sergeant. Carlos handed Jack one of the cups and sat beside him. The coffee was overbrewed and bitter, but it was hot and gave Jack something to do with his shaking hands besides watch them betray his condition. How you holding up, hermano? I've been better. That's the understatement of the century. Carlos studied him with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by brave faces. You need to talk about it. About what? The 73 people I killed? Or the fact that I'm probably going to prison for saving 500 lives? Either. Both. Whatever's eating at you right now. Jack took a sip of the terrible coffee, stared at the institutional beige wall like it might offer answers. You remember that kid in Kandahar? The one with the vest? The suicide bomber. Yeah, I remember. He was 12 years old, Carlos. 12. I put a round through his chest from 600 meters because he was running toward a checkpoint with 20 pounds of explosives strapped to his body. You saved 15 Marines at that checkpoint. I killed a child. You stopped a weapon. The people who put that vest on him killed the child long before you pulled the trigger. Jack shook his head. That's what I tell myself, every night, every single night for 8 years. But I still see his face. And now I've got 73 more faces to add to the collection. How many faces can one man carry, priest, before there's no room left for anything else? Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Jack wasn't expecting. Your grandfather carried 63. You know how I know that? The marks on the rifle. No, because Colonel Reeves told me, before we deployed. He pulled me aside and asked me to watch you. Said you were carrying your grandfather's burden along with your own. And a man could only carry so much before something broke. Jack looked up sharply. Reeves talked to you about my grandfather? More than talked. He told me the whole story. Iraq, 1991, the court-martial, everything. What else did he say? That he was there. That he was the one who gave the order your grandfather disobeyed. That he'd been living with what happened for 33 years. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. The shaking in his hands stopped, replaced by something colder. What? He didn't tell you? He never said a goddamn word. The MP appeared at the door. Time's up, Staff Sergeant. Carlos stood slowly, put his hand on Jack's shoulder. He's going to tell everyone. At the court-martial, he's going to testify about what really happened in Iraq, about how the system destroyed a good man for doing the right thing, about how he let it happen because he was too young and too scared to admit he'd been wrong. After Carlos left, Jack sat in the silence of the holding cell and tried to process this new information. Colonel Thomas Reeves, Iron Horse, a man Jack had known for 15 years, a man he'd respected, learned from, trusted with his life on multiple deployments. That man had destroyed his grandfather. The rage should have come then, the fury, the desire for revenge, or at least confrontation. But what Jack felt instead was something more complex, a terrible understanding. Reeves had been 22 when he'd given that order, the same age Jack had been when he killed his first man. Young, certain, convinced that following the rules meant doing right. And then Reeves had lived with the consequences. 33 years of knowing he'd been wrong. 33 years of watching a good man destroyed for being better than the system that judged him. 33 years of carrying his own faces. Maybe that was the real punishment. Not prison, not dishonorable discharge, Just the endless accounting of costs that nobody tallied except the person who made the choice. Hours crawled past. Jack dozed fitfully on the metal bench, his dreams populated by the usual suspects, plus 73 new arrivals. He woke to find a different MP at the door, this one carrying official-looking papers. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, you have 72 hours before your court-martial convenes. You're being released to quarters, restricted to base pending trial. Here's your formal notification. The papers outline the charges in bureaucratic precision. Article 92, failure to obey order or regulation. Potential sentence, 2 years confinement, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, dishonorable discharge. They'd added Article 94 as a possibility. Mutiny or sedition. That one carried life imprisonment for saving 500 Marines. The walk back to the barracks felt surreal. Word had spread through the base with the speed that military gossip always traveled. Marines he'd never met stopped to shake his hand. Some saluted, which was inappropriate since he was out of uniform, but the gesture carried meaning that transcended regulations. These were men who understood what he'd done, even if the system preparing to judge him didn't. His room was exactly as he'd left it. The grandfather's rifle in its case, the photo of his kids, the Bible he didn't read. But someone had been there. A note sat on his bunk, written in Miguel's careful handwriting. Boss, they're saying you're a hero. They're also saying you might go to prison. I don't understand how both can be true, but I wanted you to know that I'm alive because of you. Whatever happens, I'll testify to that. You taught me that every shot matters. You were right. So was this one. Miguel. Jack sat on the bunk and read the note 3 times. The kid didn't understand yet. Didn't grasp that the military ran on discipline and order, and what Jack had done violated both at the most fundamental level. Effectiveness didn't matter. Results didn't matter. Only obedience. Except sometimes obedience meant death. And the system had no way to reconcile that contradiction except through courts, martial, and the destruction of people caught in the gap. His phone had 17 missed calls, 3 from Sarah. The rest from numbers he didn't recognize. Probably reporters. The story had already escaped the base. Marine sniper saves 500, faces prison for disobeying orders. The kind of headline that made civilians uncomfortable because it forced them to think about the machinery that kept them safe. He listened to Sarah's voicemails. The first was angry. Jack, I just saw the news. What the hell did you do? The second was confused. They're saying you saved all those people. They're also saying you might go to prison. I don't understand. The third was quiet, almost gentle. Call me when you can. The kids saw the coverage. Emma's asking questions I don't know how to answer. Jack almost called back. Had the phone in his hand, Sarah's number on the screen. But what would he say? That he'd made a choice that might cost him everything? That he'd chosen strangers over his own family again? That he was about to become exactly what his father had always feared? His grandfather? He put the phone down without calling. The next 72 hours passed in a strange limbo, confined to base but not imprisoned, free to move but under constant watch. Marines approached him everywhere. Some wanted to shake his hand, others wanted to share their own stories, as if his willingness to break the rules had given them permission to acknowledge their own doubts about a system that sometimes valued procedure over sense. A young private from the valley found him at the mess hall on the second day. Gunny Morrison, I wanted to thank you. I'm getting married next month. I'm alive to do that because you disobeyed an order. I don't care what they say at the trial. You're a hero to me. An older staff sergeant, scarred by multiple wars, pulled him aside later. They're going to crucify you. You know that, right? The brass can't let this stand. Sets a bad precedent. But between you and me, you did the right thing. And that matters more than what some board decides. Miguel visited every evening, limping on his injured leg but refusing crutches. They'd sit in Jack's room and talk about everything except the trial. Miguel shared stories about his family, about crossing the border as a child, about his mother's dreams, about the baby on the way, about bringing his family back legally once he earned citizenship. On the second night, Miguel asked the question that had been building behind his eyes since the firefight. Boss, that guy I shot, do you think about him? Every person I've killed, I think about. You will too. How do you live with it? Jack thought about the bottle in his locker, about the divorce papers, about his kids who couldn't look at him, about the 200 faces that visited every night. Honestly, kid, I don't know if I do live with it, I carry it, but carrying and living might not be the same thing. That's not encouraging. No, but it's true. You're going to hear people tell you pretty lies about how what we do is noble and necessary and right. Maybe it is, but it's also killing, and killing costs. Anyone who tells you different is either lying or hasn't done enough of it to know better. So what do? You talk about it with priest, with me, with a therapist if you're smart. You don't bottle it up like I did. You don't try to drink it away. You face it, you let people help carry it, and you find something worth living for that's bigger than the killing. Like what? Like your family, your daughter, your wife. You be the father I couldn't figure out how to be. You be present. You be there. You let them know the man who came back from war is still the man they love, just carrying some weight. Miguel was quiet for a long time, then, "Thank you, boss, for everything." The morning of the court-martial arrived with the cold efficiency of military routine. Jack put on his dress uniform, the one reserved for formal occasions and funerals. The ribbons on his chest told a story of 16 years in combat, bronze stars, purple hearts, meritorious service, all about to be overshadowed by a single act of principled disobedience. The courtroom was packed. Media had been excluded, but the gallery was filled with Marines, some from the Valley, others who'd served with Jack over the years. In the front row, Carlos sat rigid in his dress uniform. Beside him, Miguel on crutches. And at the end of the row, Colonel Thomas Reeves, 62 years old, decorated, respected, carrying a secret that had shaped 3 decades of guilt. The board filed in, 5 officers ranging from major to colonel, serious faces, men and women who understood they were about to judge not just Jack Morrison, but the entire question of when disobedience became duty. The charges were read. Jack stood at attention, Rebecca beside him, as the prosecution laid out their case. Straightforward, damning, irrefutable in its facts, if not its conclusions. The accused willfully and deliberately disobeyed a direct order during combat operations. The order was clear. The defiance was explicit. If we allow this behavior to stand, we undermine the entire foundation of military discipline upon which our corps depends. The defense had its turn. Captain Jennifer Walsh, his appointed attorney, was sharp and prepared. She established the tactical situation, the intelligence failure, the visual confirmation Jack had provided. Rebecca's authority as on-scene commander. She painted a picture of 2 Marines making the best decision possible with the information available, in a situation where waiting for approval meant death. These Marines didn't act from arrogance. They acted because they could see the truth on the ground, and that truth contradicted assumptions made 200 miles away by officers without eyes on target. The prosecution countered smoothly. That's precisely the problem. Every Marine thinks they can see the truth. Every soldier believes their judgment's superior. If we accept that reasoning, we don't have a military. We have an armed mob making individual decisions based on personal opinion. Witnesses were called. Lieutenant Daniels testified about the ambush that would have killed them. Other Marines described the firefight, the casualties prevented, the precision of Jack's shooting. The prosecution didn't dispute the facts. They simply maintained that effectiveness didn't excuse insubordination. Rebecca took the stand, composed, professional. She owned her decision completely. "Who gave the order to engage, Captain Hayes?" "I did." "Despite explicit orders to withdraw?" "Yes, I had visual confirmation of an enemy ambush on our withdrawal route. Gunnery Morrison counted over 150 hostiles in prepared positions. Following the withdrawal order would have sent my Marines into a kill zone." "So you decided you knew better than battalion command?" "I decided that ground truth superseded flawed intelligence. I was wrong to disobey the order, but I was right about the ambush, and I would make the same choice again." They tried to break her, tried to get her to admit doubt, to acknowledge that maybe her eyes had been wrong and the distant intelligence right. Rebecca didn't budge. She'd seen what she'd seen. She'd made her choice. She'd accept the consequences. Then it was Jack's turn. He walked to the stand knowing everything he said would be analyzed, weaponized, used to either destroy him or save him. Captain Walsh had coached him. Be honest but measured. Acknowledge the disobedience but explain the necessity. Show awareness of the cost while maintaining you'd saved lives. The prosecutor went straight for impact. "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, how many enemy combatants did you kill during the engagement?" 73. You're certain of that number? Yes, I count everyone. Why? Because they deserve to be remembered, even if they were trying to kill my Marines. Every life I take, I carry with me. The prosecutor paused, clearly not expecting that answer. You carry them? Yes, all 200. I see their faces. I know what I took from them and from the world. That's the cost of this job. Yet you killed 73 more yesterday. To save 500, that's the math that matters when you're looking through a scope at your brothers about to walk into an ambush. Who gave you authority to make that calculation? Jack looked at the prosecutor, thought about all the ways to answer that question, settled on the truth. My grandfather. The courtroom stirred. The prosecutor seized it. Your grandfather? Explain that statement. Corporal Jack Morrison, Sr., 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, Operation Desert Storm, Iraq, 1991. He was a sniper. He faced the same choice I did. Follow an order that would get his brothers killed or disobey and save them. He saved them. 40 Marines lived because he made that choice. The Marine Corps court-martialed him for it. Destroyed his career. He died thinking he was a disgrace. And you wanted to follow in his footsteps? No, I wanted to not make his mistake. My father taught me that orders are absolute, that disobedience, no matter the reason, destroys everything. I believed that for 16 years, until I had to choose between my father's lesson and my grandfather's example. And you chose your grandfather. I chose to save 500 Marines. If that makes me like my grandfather, then I'll carry that legacy too. The prosecutor sat down. Captain Walsh stood for redirect. Gunny Morrison, if you could go back to that moment on the ridge, knowing what you know now about this trial, about the potential consequences, would you make a different choice? Jack didn't hesitate. No, ma'am. Every Marine in that valley deserved to go home. That matters more than my career, more than my freedom, more than anything. Even if it means prison? Even then. After his testimony, the judge called a recess. Jack stepped down, his hands shaking again now that the adrenaline was fading. Carlos met him at the defense table. You did good, hermano. I just ended my career. Maybe, but you told the truth. That counts for something. The recess stretched longer than expected. 15 minutes became 30. 30 became an hour. The gallery grew restless with waiting. Rebecca sat beside Jack at the defense table. Neither spoke. What was there to say? They'd both told their stories. Now they waited for judgment. Finally, the bailiff called the court back to order. But before the judge could speak, Colonel Reeves stood up from the gallery. Your Honor, I request permission to provide testimony relevant to this case. The judge looked surprised. Colonel Reeves, you're not on the witness list. I have information critical to understanding the context of Gunnery Sergeant Morrison's actions. Information about Corporal Jack Morrison, Sr. and the events of 1991 that shaped everything that happened on that ridge yesterday. The judge considered. The prosecution started to object, but the judge waved them silent. This is highly irregular, Colonel. Yes, sir, but necessary. Proceed. Reeves walked to the stand with the bearing of a man who'd carried a burden for 3 decades and was finally ready to set it down. He was sworn in, took his seat, and looked directly at Jack with eyes that carried 33 years of guilt. My name is Colonel Thomas Reeves. I've served in the Marine Corps for 40 years, 4 combat tours, multiple commands, and 33 years ago, in the Iraqi desert during Operation Desert Storm, I destroyed a good man for doing exactly what Gunnery Sergeant Morrison did yesterday. The courtroom went absolutely silent. February 14th, 1991. I was Lieutenant Thomas Reeves, 22 years old, fresh from the academy, convinced I understood everything. I commanded a rifle platoon pushing north toward Kuwait City. We were ordered to withdraw from our forward position due to reported Republican Guard movements in our sector. My sniper, Corporal Jack Morrison, Sr., reported an Iraqi ambush waiting on our withdrawal route. I didn't believe him. I had my orders from battalion. I was going to follow them. Reeves's voice was steady, but his hands gripped the witness stand hard enough to blanch white. Corporal Morrison disobeyed my direct order. He opened fire on that ambush, eliminated 11 Iraqi soldiers in fighting positions that would have killed every man in my platoon, saved 40 Marines, including me, and I repaid him by testifying against him at his court-martial. Jack felt something crack open in his chest. 33 years of family history, his father's bitterness, the question of why his grandfather had died broken and alone. All of it suddenly made terrible sense. Jack Morrison Sr. was the best Marine I ever knew, Reeves continued, and I destroyed him. I testified that he'd violated orders, undermined discipline, acted recklessly. I couldn't admit that my order would have killed everyone. I was 22 and scared and wrong, and I let him take the punishment for my failure. Reeves turned to address the board directly. He was dishonorably discharged, lost his pension, lost his pride. His son, Jack's father, spent his life angry at him for disobeying orders, never knowing the full truth. Jack Morrison Sr. died at 57. Alcoholic, broken, convinced he was a disgrace, because I was too much of a coward to tell the truth 33 years ago. The prosecutor stood. Objection. This is not relevant testimony. This is emotional manipulation designed to overrule, the judge said quietly. I want to hear this. Reeves continued, his voice stronger now. Yesterday, Jack Morrison Jr. faced the same impossible choice his grandfather faced. Follow orders and watch his brothers or disobey and save them. He chose to save them, just like his grandfather. And if this board convicts him, you're repeating the worst mistake of my career. You're telling every Marine that obedience to bad orders matters more than the lives of the men beside you. He stood, looked at Jack. Your grandfather was the bravest Marine I ever knew. He taught me what real courage looks like, even though I was too young and stupid to understand it at the time. You're just like him, and that's the highest compliment I can give. Reeves stepped down. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge called for order, his gavel sharp against wood. Jack sat frozen, trying to process what he'd just heard. The man he'd respected for 15 years was the reason his family had been broken. Was the reason his father had taught him to fear his grandfather's example. Was the reason everything had been so complicated. But Reeves had finally told the truth. After 33 years of carrying guilt, he'd stood up and owned what he'd done. It didn't fix anything, didn't bring back the old man, didn't heal his father's bitterness. But it was something, an accounting, a confession, a burden shared instead of carried alone. The judge looked shaken by the testimony. Does the defense have additional witnesses? Captain Walsh stood. Your Honor, in light of Colonel Reeves' testimony, I request a recess to confer with my clients. Granted, this court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 0800 hours for closing arguments and deliberation. The gallery emptied slowly, Marines filing out in quiet conversation, processing what they just witnessed. Jack sat at the defense table, unable to move. Carlos appeared beside him. Miguel, too, leaning on his crutches, and finally, Colonel Reeves. The four of them stood in the emptying courtroom. Jack looked at Reeves, seeing him differently now. Not a mentor, not a superior officer, just a man who'd made a terrible mistake at 22 and spent 33 years trying to figure out how to live with it. Sir, Jack said finally, why didn't you ever tell me? Because I'm a coward. Because I spent 33 years convincing myself that time would make it matter less. It didn't. The guilt just got heavier. My father never knew, did he, that you were the one who gave the order? No, I kept that secret. Let him hate his father without knowing the full story. That's on me, too. Jack didn't know what to say. Didn't know if there was forgiveness for something like this. Didn't know if forgiveness even mattered when the damage was done and the dead stayed dead. What you did today, Jack said slowly. Telling the truth after all these years. That took courage. Don't give me that much credit. I should have done it 33 years ago. Should have stood up at his court-martial and told him the order was mine and the failure was mine. But I didn't. I let a good man be destroyed to protect my career. But you told the truth today. That counts for something. They stood in silence, four men carrying different pieces of the same weight. Then Miguel spoke, his young voice cutting through the moment. Boss, there's something you should see outside. They walked to the windows overlooking the courtyard. Below, hundreds of Marines had gathered. Word had spread about Reeves' testimony, about the connection between Jack and his grandfather, about the 33-year echo of the same choice, the same consequence, the same system destroying good men for being better than the rules. As Jack appeared in the window, the Marines came to attention as one. Then slowly, deliberately, they saluted. Not the quick salute of routine. The slow, meaningful salute of respect, of understanding, of brotherhood that transcended regulations. Jack stood at the window, his throat tight, watching this silent tribute. 200 faces he carried, 500 lives he'd saved, and an entire corps trying to figure out whether discipline or humanity mattered more when the two collided. Carlos spoke quietly beside him. They're with you, all of them. Whatever the board decides tomorrow, you need to know that. Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. Below, the Marines held their salute. Hundreds of them, young and old, officers and enlisted, all of them acknowledging that sometimes the hardest choice is the right one, even when the system punishes you for making it. The sun was setting over Camp Pendleton, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Tomorrow would bring the verdict: prison or freedom, disgrace or redemption, the end of his career or somehow, impossibly, a second chance. But tonight, surrounded by men who understood the impossible mathematics of violence in service of protection, Jack Morrison allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the system would recognize what his grandfather had known and what he'd proven again. You save your brothers. Everything else is details. The Marines finally broke their salute, began dispersing into the evening. But the message had been delivered, received, understood. Jack turned from the window, looked at Reeves, at Carlos, at Miguel. 3 generations of Marines connected by choices made under fire and consequences carried afterward. Whatever happens tomorrow, Jack said quietly, thank you, all of you, for standing with me. Reeves put his hand on Jack's shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud. I never told him that, but I'm telling you, he'd be proud of the man you became. It was the absolution Jack hadn't known he needed, not for himself, for the ghost of a man who died thinking he was a failure. The 4 of them walked out of the courthouse together, into the California evening, into the uncertainty of tomorrow, into whatever came next. But for tonight, that was enough. The night after Colonel Reeves' testimony, Jack Morrison couldn't sleep. His quarters felt like a cell despite the open door. The base was quiet, but his mind was chaos. 73 new faces, 33 years of family lies exposed, a court-martial that could end with prison, and somewhere out there, his kids watching news coverage of their father being called both hero and traitor. He sat on his bunk, hands still shaking, the grandfather's rifle beside him. The 63 marks carved into the stock felt different now that he knew the truth. Each one represented a life saved because of a life taken. Just like the 73, Jack had added to his own count. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. The kids saw the news. Emma wants to talk to you. Are you okay to talk to her? Jack stared at the message. Was he okay to talk to his 12-year-old daughter? To explain why he disobeyed orders? To help her understand that sometimes doing right meant breaking rules? He wasn't okay, but he typed back anyway. Put her on. The phone rang seconds later. He answered on the second ring. Daddy? That one word, that single syllable in Emma's voice. It broke something in him that had been holding together through sheer stubbornness. Hey, baby girl, are you in trouble? How did you explain military justice to a 12-year-old? How did you make her understand that the same system that gave him medals was about to potentially take everything? Yeah, I am. But you saved all those people. The news said you saved 500 Marines. I did, but I had to break some rules to do it. Emma was quiet for a moment, then, like when I broke Mom's vase trying to save the cat. Jack almost smiled despite everything. Yeah, kind of like that, except bigger. Mom was mad about the vase, but she was happy the cat was okay. Are they mad about the rules but happy about the Marines? Out of the mouths of children. Some of them are. Some of them think the rules matter more than anything. That's stupid. Emma, it is, Daddy. You saved 500 people. That's more important than rules. I wish the people deciding my case thought like you. Can I come see you? The question caught him off guard. You want to? You're my dad. I was mad at you for not being there. But now you're in trouble and I should be there. Jack felt his throat get tight. Baby girl, I would love to see you, but I'm restricted to base. They won't let me leave until the trial's over. When's that? Tomorrow. They'll decide tomorrow if I go to prison. Emma's voice got small. Prison? Maybe. I hope not, but maybe. Daddy, I'm scared. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. They talked for another 10 minutes. Emma told him about school, about a test she'd aced, about Jacob finally making a goal in soccer. Normal things, life continuing despite the chaos. When they hung up, Jack sat holding the phone, feeling like maybe, possibly, he hadn't completely destroyed his relationship with his kids. A knock on his door. Carlos stood there with 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. Can't sleep either, hermano? Sleep's for people with clear consciences. Carlos came in, handed him a cup. Your conscience should be crystal clear. You saved 500 lives. I killed 73 to do it. Added them to the 127 I was already carrying. I'm at 200 faces now, priest. 200 people who won't go home because I decided they needed to die so other people could live. Those people were trying to kill Marines. They made their choice. Doesn't make it easier to carry them. Carlos sat on the only chair in the small room. I've been thinking about what Reeves said, about your grandfather, about how the system destroyed him for doing the right thing. And? And I think the system's learned since then, or at least I hope it has. Public opinion matters now in ways it didn't in '91, the internet, social media, people paying attention. Public opinion doesn't overrule military law. No, but it applies pressure, makes it harder for the brass to sweep things under the rug. Jack sipped the terrible coffee. What are you saying? I'm saying you might be surprised by what happens tomorrow. The board knows the whole world is watching. They know Marines are calling you a hero. They know what happened to your grandfather. That changes the calculation. Or it makes them double down to prove they're not swayed by public opinion. Always the optimist, always the realist. They sat in companionable silence for a while. Then Carlos spoke again. Miguel came to see me tonight. Kid's not doing well. First kill, it hits hard. He keeps saying he can see the guy's face. Keeps wondering if the guy had kids, a wife, people who'll miss him. That means he's got a conscience, better than the alternative. He asked me if it gets easier. I didn't know what to tell him. Jack thought about his 200 faces, about the 16 years since the first one, about nights when the whiskey was the only thing that shut them up. Tell him the truth. It doesn't get easier. You just get used to carrying it, and tell him to talk about it. Don't do what I did. Don't bottle it up until it poisons everything. I'll tell him. More silence. Then Carlos stood. Try to get some rest, hermano. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. You need to be sharp. After Carlos left, Jack tried to sleep. Failed. Ended up sitting on his bunk, cleaning the grandfather's rifle for the third time that week. The ritual was soothing, meditative, breaking down the weapon, cleaning each piece, reassembling, the muscle memory of 10,000 repetitions. He thought about his grandfather, about Jack Morrison Sr., 22 years old in the Iraqi desert, looking at an ambush and making a choice, about Lieutenant Reeves giving an order that would have killed everyone, about the old man disobeying and saving 40 lives, about the court-martial that followed, the dishonorable discharge, the slow descent into alcoholism and despair. Had the old man thought it was worth it? Those 40 Marines he saved, had they made the disgrace worthwhile? Or had he died wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake? Jack would probably never know. But he understood the choice now in a way he never had before. When you could see the truth and the system couldn't, when following orders meant watching your brothers die, what choice did you really have? His phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison? Speaking. This is Lieutenant Marcus Daniels. I hope it's not too late to call. Jack checked the time. Oh, 200. It's fine, Lieutenant. I wasn't sleeping. Sir, I wanted to tell you something before tomorrow. Something I need you to know. Go ahead. My father is Senator Robert Daniels. He's on the Armed Services Committee. He has influence over military appropriations and promotions. Jack waited, unsure where this was going. When I joined the Marines, I told him I didn't want him interfering in my career. I wanted to succeed or fail on my own merit. He respected that. But tonight, I called him. I told him what happened in that valley. I told him about you and Captain Hayes, about the choice you made. Lieutenant, let me finish, sir. I told him that if the Marine Corps court-martials you for saving my life and the lives of everyone in my platoon, then the Marine Corps doesn't deserve the funding it gets. I told him to make it clear to the brass that the whole world is watching, that this case matters, that how they handle it will determine how a lot of people view the Corps going forward. Jack didn't know what to say. You didn't have to do that. Yes, sir, I did. You saved my life. The least I can do is make sure the people judging you know there are consequences for getting this wrong. I appreciate it, but I don't want special treatment. It's not special treatment, sir. It's making sure you get fair treatment. There's a difference. After they hung up, Jack sat holding the phone. A West Point lieutenant pulling strings with his senator father. It felt wrong somehow, but it also felt like exactly what the Marines in that valley would do, taking care of their own, making sure the people who saved them didn't get destroyed for it. The night dragged on. Jack dozed fitfully between 0200 and 0500, woke to his alarm feeling like he'd been hit by a truck, showered, put on his dress uniform, checked his ribbons. Everything had to be perfect. When you were being judged, appearance mattered. The walk to the courthouse felt like walking to an execution. Marines watched from windows and doorways. Some nodded, others saluted, a few called out encouragement. But everyone knew what today was. Verdict day. The day the system decided if doing the right thing mattered more than following orders. The courtroom was even more packed than the day before. Media had been allowed in for the verdict. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled half the gallery. The other half was Marines. So many Marines, some from the Valley, others who'd served with Jack over the years, all of them there to witness. Rebecca was already at the defense table. She looked composed, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders. Captain Walsh, their attorney, was organizing documents with the focused intensity of someone preparing for war. The board filed in 5 officers, faces that gave nothing away. They'd spent the night deliberating, reviewing evidence, debating the impossible question of when disobedience became duty. The judge called the court to order. This court-martial has heard testimony over the past 3 days regarding charges of willful disobedience of lawful orders against Captain Rebecca Hayes and Gunnery Sergeant Jack Morrison. The board has deliberated and reached a verdict. But before that verdict is announced, new information has come to light that requires this court's attention. Jack and Rebecca exchanged glances. New information? What could possibly have changed overnight? The judge continued. Colonel Sutton, please stand. In the gallery, Colonel Richard Sutton stood. He looked confident, smug even. The man who'd given the orders that would have killed 500 Marines looked like he'd already won. Colonel Sutton, did you submit evidence to this court-martial regarding Lance Corporal Miguel Torres and alleged compromising financial relationships? Yes, Your Honor. Evidence suggesting Torres may have been compromised by cartel money, which could have influenced the actions of Captain Hayes and Gunnery Sergeant Morrison. And when did you submit this evidence? 48 hours ago, sir. Before or after the engagement in question? After, sir. The investigation uncovered the connections after the fact. The judge looked at some papers on his bench. Colonel Sutton, this court has reviewed the metadata on the documents you submitted. The bank records you provided showing deposits to Torres's account were created 72 hours ago. Not discovered. Created. Can you explain that? Sutton's face went pale. That must be an error in the system timestamp, sir. The system timestamp also shows these documents were created from a computer assigned to your office, specifically from your personal terminal. The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel came down hard. Order! Your Honor, Sutton said, his voice losing its confidence. I can explain. You'll have the opportunity to explain to a separate board convened to investigate evidence, tampering, and conduct unbecoming an officer. MPS, please escort Colonel Sutton from this courtroom. 2 MPs moved to Sutton's position. He looked around wildly, realizing what was happening. This is a mistake. I was trying to protect the Corps from what, Colonel? From 2 Marines who saved 500 lives? From the truth about your bad intelligence? From accountability for your own failures? The MPs took Sutton by the arms. As they led him past Jack's table, Sutton locked eyes with him. This isn't over, Morrison. You ruined my career. Colonel Sutton, the judge's voice cut through. You ruined your own career the moment you fabricated evidence against Marines under your command. Remove him. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Sutton was escorted out. Then the whispers started, building to a roar. The judge's gavel came down again. Order. This court will have order. When the room finally quieted, the judge looked at Jack and Rebecca. The board has reviewed all evidence, including testimony from Colonel Reeves regarding historical parallels to this case. We have also reviewed combat footage obtained from helmet cameras worn by Marines in the Valley. Footage that clearly shows the ambush Captain Hayes and Gunnery Sergeant Morrison disrupted. He paused. Let the weight of the moment build. This board finds that while the accused did technically disobey direct orders, those orders were based on faulty intelligence. Captain Hayes, as on-scene commander with direct visual confirmation of enemy positions, had authority to make tactical decisions to protect Marine Corps personnel. Jack felt his heart hammering. Was this going where he thought it was going? Furthermore, this board finds that Gunnery Sergeant Morrison acted under direct orders from his commanding officer, Captain Hayes. While we cannot condone a pattern of disobeying orders, we recognize that this was an extraordinary circumstance requiring extraordinary action. The judge looked directly at them. On all charges, this board finds the defendants not guilty. The courtroom exploded, cheering, shouting, Marines on their feet. Rebecca grabbed Jack's hand, squeezing tight. Captain Walsh allowed herself a small smile. But the judge wasn't done. He raised his hand for silence. However, this verdict comes with serious caveats. This was an exceptional case. Do not mistake this verdict as permission to routinely question orders. Military discipline exists for vital reasons. What Captain Hayes and Gunnery Sergeant Morrison did worked. But it could have gone catastrophically wrong. The fact that it didn't is as much luck as skill. He stood. Captain Hayes, you are hereby promoted to Major for demonstrated leadership under fire. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, you are recommended for the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism in combat. This court is adjourned. Jack sat stunned. Not guilty, promoted, decorated. Everything he'd expected to lose, he'd kept. Everything he'd thought would be taken, remained. Carlos was suddenly there, pulling him into a crushing hug. I told you, hermano, I told you. Miguel was crying, leaning on his crutches. Marines from the valley were pushing forward to shake Jack's hand. Lieutenant Daniel stood at attention and saluted. Rebecca was surrounded by people congratulating her. And then Jack saw them. At the back of the courtroom, Sarah, Emma, Jacob. They'd come. He pushed through the crowd toward them. Emma saw him coming and started running. She hit him hard enough to make his ribs scream, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around her and held on like she might disappear. Daddy, you're okay. You're not going to prison. No, baby girl, I'm not going to prison. Jacob was there too, hugging Jack's leg. Sarah stood a few feet back, tears streaming down her face. When Emma and Jacob finally let go, Jack looked at his ex-wife. You came. Of course we came, Emma insisted. Jacob too. They saw the footage, the video that went viral. What video? Sarah pulled out her phone, showed him. A Marine had posted helmet camera footage. The battle in the valley. Jack's voice over the radio coordinating with Rebecca. The precision of his shooting. Miguel's first kill and Jack's quiet words of comfort afterward. The moment when the Apaches arrived and Jack lowered his rifle with just 15 rounds remaining. The video had 40 million views, 4,000 comments, and it was titled, This is what real heroism looks like. Gunnery Sergeant Jack Morrison saved 500 Marines. The whole country's been watching, Sarah said, waiting to see what would happen. Emma's been defending you to anyone who'll listen. Jacob told his class you were the bravest person he knew. Jack knelt down to Jacob's level. You said that? Jacob nodded, his voice small but clear. You saved all those people, Dad. That's what heroes do. I'm not a hero, buddy. I'm just a Marine who did his job. That's what heroes say, Emma interjected. Real heroes don't think they're heroes. That's what makes them heroes. Sarah laughed despite her tears. She's been rehearsing that line all morning. Jack stood, looked at Sarah. I know the divorce is final. I know I messed everything up. But thank you for bringing them. It means everything. Sarah stepped closer. Jack, the divorce might be final on paper, but Emma made me realize something. I didn't stop loving you because you were a bad person. I stopped because I couldn't compete with the mission, with the Marines, with the thing you were good at. I'm sorry for all of it. I know. And watching that video, seeing you with Miguel after his first kill, hearing the way you talked to him, the compassion and understanding, that's the man I married. The man I forgot was still in there under all the PTSD and the drinking and the distance. I don't know if I can change. If I can be the husband and father you need, maybe not. But maybe we can figure out a different version. Not married, but not enemies either. Co-parents who actually like each other for their sake. She gestured to Emma and Jacob. I'd like that. Family counseling. You, me, and the kids. Starting next week. Non-negotiable. Yes, ma'am. Emma and Jacob laughed at that. The sound was music Jack had thought he'd never hear again, directed at him with affection instead of scorn. Colonel Reeves approached, waiting respectfully for the family moment to pause. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, may I have a word? Jack turned to him. The man who'd destroyed his grandfather. The man who'd finally told the truth. Sir, I wanted to give you this. Reeves handed him an envelope. It's the official notice. The Marine Corps has posthumously awarded your grandfather the Silver Star for his actions in Iraq. There will be a ceremony next month at Arlington. Your father has been invited to accept on behalf of your grandfather. Jack opened the envelope, read the citation. Corporal Jack Morrison Sr., for extraordinary heroism in combat operations, willingly placed himself in danger to save the lives of 40 Marines, demonstrating the highest traditions of the Marine Corps. I petitioned for the Medal of Honor, Reeves continued, but they felt the Silver Star was more appropriate given the circumstances. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's something. It's more than something, sir. It's justice. 33 years late, but justice. I've also requested that his dishonorable discharge be changed to honorable. That should be approved within the month. He'll get his pension retroactively. His name cleared. His service honored. Jack felt his eyes getting wet. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I'm just fixing what I should never have broken. Reeves put his hand on Jack's shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud of you. I failed to tell him that 33 years ago. But I'm telling you now, you're exactly the Marine he hoped you'd be. After Tim, Carlos brought Miguel over. The kid was still on crutches, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been the night before. Boss, I wanted to introduce you to someone. Miguel gestured to a small woman standing nearby. This is my mother, Rosa. Rosa stepped forward. She was maybe 5 feet tall, weathered by years of hard work, but her eyes were bright and fierce. She said something in rapid Spanish to Miguel. Miguel translated. She says thank you for keeping me alive, for teaching me, for helping me become a citizen and a Marine. Tell her it was my honor. Miguel translated. Rosa said something else, longer this time, her voice thick with emotion. She says you gave her son a future, that in Mexico we had nothing, no hope, no future. Here, because of the Marines, because of you, I have everything. I'm a citizen now. I can bring her back legally. My daughter will be born here. All because you kept me alive long enough to earn it. Jack didn't know what to say. This woman who'd crossed a border illegally 20 years ago, who'd worked 3 jobs to give her son a chance, who'd probably spent every day terrified of deportation, was thanking him. Your son is a good Marine, he managed. He saved my life out there. He's braver than he knows. Miguel translated. Rosa smiled, tears streaming down her face. Then she did something unexpected. She hugged Jack. This tiny woman who barely came up to his chest wrapped her arms around him and held on tight, saying something over and over in Spanish. She's saying God bless you, Miguel said quietly. She's saying God bless you. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Interviews with military media, phone calls from people he hadn't heard from in years, messages of congratulations. Through it all, Emma and Jacob stayed close, like they were afraid he might disappear if they let him out of their sight. That evening, as the sun set over Camp Pendleton, Jack found himself on the same ridge where all of this had started. The place where he'd looked through a scope and seen an ambush, where he'd made a choice that could have destroyed him, but somehow hadn't. Carlos joined him. They stood in silence, watching the sun paint the California sky in shades of orange and red. Hell of a day, hermano. Hell of a week. You think you'll stay in now that you're not getting kicked out? Jack thought about it. Thought about 16 years of service, 200 faces he carried, the broken relationships and the PTSD and the nights when the bottle was the only friend he had. But he also thought about 500 Marines who were alive, about Miguel learning to be a citizen and a father, about Emma and Jacob looking at him with something other than disappointment, about doing the thing he was good at, even when it cost him everything. Yeah, he said finally, I think I'll stay, at least until they make me leave. This is what I know, what I'm good at. Maybe I can teach others to be good at it too. Pass on what I've learned. Make sure the next generation knows when to follow orders and when to trust their eyes. You'd make a hell of an instructor. Yeah, well, someone's got to teach these kids that the real world doesn't look like the PowerPoint slides. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ceremony for his grandfather, the counseling with Sarah and the kids, the work of rebuilding relationships he'd let crumble, the long process of learning to carry 200 faces without letting them crush him. But tonight, watching the sunset with his best friend, knowing his kids were safe in a hotel nearby instead of unreachable in another state, knowing he'd done the right thing even when it was the hard thing, Jack Morrison allowed himself something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the absence of conflict, not the end of struggle, but the quiet knowledge that he'd made choices he could live with, that the 73 new faces he carried were balanced by 500 beating hearts, that his grandfather's legacy was honor instead of disgrace, that maybe, possibly, he could be the father his kids deserved and the Marine the Corps needed. 1 shot, 1 kill, 200 times over, but also 500 lives saved, relationships mended, truth told, justice served. In the mathematics of violence and sacrifice, maybe that balanced out. Maybe it was enough. As darkness fell over the ridge, Jack and Carlos walked back to base together. Behind them, the empty desert. Ahead, the uncertain future. But for the first time in longer than Jack could remember, the future looked like something worth facing. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one shot at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. 3 months after the court-martial, Jack Morrison stood in Arlington National Cemetery wearing his dress blues, the weight of the silver star heavy on his chest. The November air was cold, the sky overcast, and around him stood 200 people who'd come to witness history being corrected. His grandfather's grave was simple, a white marble headstone among thousands of others. The inscription had read, Corporal Jack Morrison, Sr., United States Marine Corps, 1969 to 2026. Dishonorable discharge. But workmen had been here yesterday, replacing that stone with a new one. This one read, Corporal Jack Morrison, Sr., United States Marine Corps, 1969 to 2026 Silver Star. Honorable service. Jack stood to the right of the grave. To his left, his father, Jack Morrison, Jr., 62 years old, weathered by a lifetime of bitterness and anger, holding a folded flag in a metal case containing his father's posthumously awarded Silver Star. They hadn't spoken in 3 months, not since the news had broken about the award, not since Jack had called to tell his father that Reeves had confessed. That the grandfather Jack Sr. had died thinking he was a disgrace was actually a hero. The ceremony began. A Marine Corps general Jack didn't know personally stepped forward to read the citation. His voice carried across the cemetery, formal and precise. For extraordinary heroism in combat operations during Operation Desert Storm, Corporal Jack Morrison Sr., serving as a scout sniper with 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, willingly placed himself in harm's way when he identified an enemy ambush threatening the lives of 40 Marines under his protection. Despite direct orders to withdraw, Corporal Morrison engaged enemy forces at extreme range, eliminating 11 hostile fighters and saving every member of his platoon from certain death. His actions demonstrated courage, tactical excellence, and unwavering devotion to his fellow Marines. Corporal Morrison's heroism upholds the highest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. The general presented the medal to Jack's father. The old man took it with shaking hands, stared at it like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Then came the part Jack had been dreading. The general asked if anyone wanted to speak. Jack's father stepped forward. For a long moment, he just stood there looking at his own father's grave. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I spent 55 years angry at this man. Angry because I thought he'd thrown away everything for nothing. Angry because he disobeyed orders. Angry because he died a drunk and a disgrace and left me to carry that shame. He paused, looked at the medal in his hands. But I was wrong. He didn't throw away anything. He saved 40 lives. 40 men who went home to their families because my father decided their lives mattered more than his career. And I hated him for it. I taught my son to hate him for it. I spent my whole life making sure Jack knew that his grandfather was a failure, a cautionary tale about what happens when you don't follow orders. Jack's father turned to look at him directly. And then my son faced the same choice, the exact same impossible choice, follow orders or save lives. And he made the same choice his grandfather made, saved 500 Marines, got court-martialed for it, just like his grandfather. Tears were streaming down the old man's face now. But unlike me, the Marines who Jack saved, they didn't abandon him. They stood up for him. They testified for him. They made sure the truth came out. And watching my son go through what my father went through, I finally understood. He looked back at the grave. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never believed you. I'm sorry I taught my son to be ashamed of you. I'm sorry I let you die thinking you were a failure when you were the bravest man I ever knew. I hope wherever you are, you can forgive me. I hope you know that your grandson is exactly the Marine you were. And I hope you know that I'm proud. Proud of you, proud of him, proud to carry the Morrison name. He placed the medal case on top of the headstone, stood at attention, saluted his father's grave with the crisp precision of a man who'd spent his whole life in the military's orbit, even if he'd never served himself. Jack felt his own tears falling, couldn't stop them, didn't try twice. Around them, Marines and civilians alike were openly crying. Colonel Reeves stood nearby, his face carved from stone, but his eyes wet. The ceremony concluded. The crowd began to disperse, but Jack's father didn't move. He stood at the grave, one hand on the headstone, having a conversation with his father that was 33 years too late but happening anyway. Jack waited. Eventually, his father turned to him. "I owe you an apology, too." "Dad, let me finish. I taught you wrong. I taught you that orders were absolute, that disobedience was the worst sin a Marine could commit. I taught you to be ashamed of your grandfather, and in doing that, I taught you to be ashamed of the best parts of yourself. You were trying to protect me. You didn't want me to end up like him. But he didn't end up badly because he disobeyed. He ended up badly because the system punished him for doing right, and I reinforced that punishment by hating him for it. I broke him more than the dishonorable discharge ever did." Jack's father took a step closer. "When I watched that video of you in the valley, when I heard you talking to that young Marine after his first kill, I heard your grandfather's voice. The compassion, the understanding, the courage to do what was right even when it cost everything. And I realized I'd spent my whole life trying to kill those qualities in you, and you'd kept them anyway. I don't know what to say, Dad. Say you'll forgive me. Say we can start over. Say I can be the father I should have been instead of the bitter old man I became." Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled his father into a hug. The old man held on tight, and for the first time in Jack's memory, they stood together at a Morrison family grave without anger or resentment or shame. Just two men finally understanding the grandfather who connected them. When they separated, Emma and Jacob were waiting nearby with Sarah. They'd hung back during the ceremony, but now they approached. Jack's father knelt down to his grandchildren's level. "Emma, Jacob, I'm your grandfather, and I've been a terrible grandfather because I was too angry to see what mattered. I'd like to change that if you'll let me." Emma looked at her dad. Jack nodded. She turned back to her grandfather. "Will you tell us about great-grandpa, about what he was really like?" Jack's father smiled through his tears. Yeah, I can do that. I've got 55 years of stories I should have been telling all along." The four of them walked through the cemetery together. Jack watched them go, his father holding Jacob's hand, Emma peppering him with questions, Sarah smiling at the sight of her kids finally connecting with their grandfather. 3 generations of Morrisons, and for the first time, the legacy was something other than anger and shame. Carlos appeared at Jack's side. "Beautiful ceremony, hermano." "Yeah, it was. You ready for Monday?" Monday, his first day as chief instructor at the Scout Sniper School. The promotion had come through last week. Master Gunnery Sergeant Jack Morrison, decorated war hero, and now teacher, ready as I'll ever be. "You're going to be great at it, teaching these young Marines what it really means to be a sniper. I'm going to teach them to think, to question, to trust their eyes instead of just their orders. Dangerous curriculum, necessary curriculum. If my grandfather had been in an environment where questioning orders was okay, maybe he wouldn't have been destroyed for it. If I'd been taught to trust my instincts instead of just following the chain of command, maybe I would have avoided some of the mistakes I made." They walked together through the cemetery. Behind them, Marines were still gathered around the grandfather's grave, paying respects, taking photos. The story of the 3 Morrisons had captured something in the public imagination. The idea that doing right sometimes meant breaking rules, that heroism sometimes looked like disobedience, that the system could be wrong even when it was lawful. "Miguel's doing well," Carlos said. "He passed his citizenship test last week. His daughter was born 2 days ago." "He name her yet?" "Jacqueline, Jackie for short, after you." Jack stopped walking. He didn't have to do that. He wanted to, said his daughter should carry the name of the man who saved his life and taught him what it means to be a Marine. Jack thought about Miguel's first kill, the kid's horror at what he'd done, the long conversations afterward about carrying the weight of taking a life. Miguel had come through it, gotten therapy, talked to Carlos regularly, hadn't made the mistakes Jack had made, bottling it up and letting it poison everything. He's going to be a good father, better than you were at his age, because you taught him not to make your mistakes. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Jack stood in front of 30 new sniper candidates at Quantico. They were young, eager, full of the confidence that came from passing the initial selection. They had no idea what they were about to learn. Jack had spent the weekend setting up the classroom. On the wall behind him hung 3 items: a photo of his grandfather in Desert Camo, the M40A1 rifle in a display case, and a photo from the valley, Jack behind his scope, Miguel spotting, Rebecca coordinating. The image had become iconic, been on magazine covers, won awards. "Welcome to Scout Sniper School," Jack began. "I'm Master Gunnery Sergeant Morrison. Before we talk about rifles or tactics or how to kill a man from a mile away, I want to talk about responsibility. He gestured to the photo of his grandfather. This is Corporal Jack Morrison, Sr., Iraq, 1991. He was court-martialed for disobeying orders, spent 33 years with a dishonorable discharge, died thinking he was a disgrace. 3 months ago, the Marine Corps awarded him the Silver Star and changed his discharge to honorable. The candidates stirred. They knew this story. Everyone knew this story. Why did he get court-martialed? Because he disobeyed a direct order to save 40 Marines from an ambush. Why did he get the Silver Star? Same reason. He disobeyed a direct order to save 40 Marines from an ambush. Jack let that sink in. The facts didn't change. What changed was the perspective, the understanding that sometimes the right thing and the lawful thing aren't the same thing. He moved to the rifle. This rifle has 63 marks on it. Each one represents a life my grandfather took to save a life. Each one is someone who woke up that morning not knowing it was their last day. My grandfather carried those 63 faces until the day he died. Then he pointed to the photo of himself. 3 months ago, I added 73 more faces to my own count. Total of 200 people I've killed in 16 years. I see every one of them when I close my eyes. I know their faces better than I know my own children's faces sometimes. That's the cost. One of the candidates raised his hand. Sir, why are you telling us this? Because they're going to teach you to shoot. They're going to teach you range estimation and wind calls and ballistic calculations. All the technical skills you need. But nobody's going to teach you the thing that matters most. That every time you pull that trigger, you're making a choice. And you're going to carry that choice forever. Jack walked among the candidates. You'll hear the motto, one shot, one kill. It's about precision, but it's about more than that. It's about knowing what you're killing for, about being able to look at yourself in the mirror afterward, about carrying the weight without letting it crush you. He stopped, looked at each of them in turn. Some of you won't make it through this school. That's okay. Better to know now you can't do this job than to know later when you're in the field and Marines are depending on you. Some of you will make it through and never fire a shot in anger. That's the best outcome. And some of you will do what I did. Kill people to save people, make impossible choices, carry faces you can't forget. Another candidate spoke up. Sir, how do you live with it? The faces you carry? Jack thought about the question, about the bottle he'd finally thrown away a month ago, about the therapy he'd started attending twice a week, about Emma and Jacob learning to trust him again, about Sarah who'd become a friend instead of an enemy. Honestly, you don't live with it. You live despite it. You find people who understand. You talk about it instead of bottling it up. You let people help you carry the weight. And you find something worth protecting that's bigger than the killing. Like what? Like family. Like the Marines next to you. Like the idea that good people should be able to go home. You find your reason, and when the faces get too heavy, you remember why you did it. The class continued. Jack taught them about wind reading, about range estimation, about the technical aspects of long-range shooting. But he also taught them about the human cost, about PTSD, about alcoholism, about failed marriages and kids who stopped looking at you, and nights when the bottle seemed like the only friend. They'll tell you snipers are different, he said near the end of the day. That we're special, elite, better than regular Marines. That's bullshit. We're not better. We're just willing to carry a different kind of weight. We're the ones who have to look at faces and decide which ones stop breathing so others can keep breathing. That doesn't make us heroes. It makes us useful, and it makes us haunted. After class, several candidates approached him. They had questions, not about shooting, about everything else. How did you talk to your family about what you did? How did you sleep? How did you know if you were making the right choice? Jack answered as honestly as he could. Drew on 16 years of experience, on 200 faces, on a court-martial that could have destroyed him but hadn't, on the grandfather who'd walked this path before him and paid a higher price. That evening, he drove to Sarah's house for family counseling, their 4th session. It was awkward and difficult and painful, but it was also necessary. Emma and Jacob needed to understand why their father had been absent. Sarah needed to understand that the distance hadn't been because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to bridge the gap between who he was in combat and who he needed to be at home. The therapist was good, patient. She let them work through things at their own pace, Didn't push for easy forgiveness or false reconciliation. Just helped them communicate. Emma, the therapist said, you wrote in your journal that you felt like your dad loved the Marines more than you. Can you tell him that? Emma looked at her hands. I know you saved all those people, Dad. I know what you do is important. But I wanted you to want to save time for me, too. I wanted to be as important as the mission. Jack felt the words like bullets. Baby girl, you are more important. You've always been more important. I just didn't know how to show it. I didn't know how to be the dad you needed and the Marine the Corps needed at the same time. Why not? It was such a simple question. Such an impossible question. Because being a good Marine means being ready to kill, being ready to make decisions that end lives. And being a good dad means being gentle and patient and present. I didn't know how to be both, so I was good at the one I understood and bad at the one that mattered more. Do you understand now? I'm trying to. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm teaching instead of deploying. That's why I want to be in your life, even though I messed up so badly. Jacob spoke up, his 9-year-old voice clear. You can still be both, Dad. You can be a Marine and a dad. You just have to try harder at the dad part. The simplicity of it, the clarity, out of the mouths of children. You're right, buddy. I do have to try harder, and I will, I promise. The session ended. Sarah walked him to his truck. They're starting to forgive you, she said, starting to understand. What about you? I forgave you a while ago. I had to, for my own peace. But forgiving and forgetting aren't the same thing. I can't forget the years of being second place. Can't forget the deployments where I didn't know if you'd come back. Can't forget watching you drink yourself into oblivion because you didn't know how else to deal with what you'd done. I don't expect you to forget. I just hope we can build something new. Not marriage, but something better than the anger we had. We're getting there, slowly, one session at a time. Jack drove back to base thinking about second chances, about how rare they were, about how many people never got them. His grandfather never got a second chance, died with a dishonorable discharge and a broken heart. But Jack had gotten one. The court-martial that could have destroyed him had somehow become his redemption. 2 weeks later, Jack stood in the same classroom with his second cohort of students. This time, he started differently. How many of you know why you're here? Really know? Silence, confused looks. You're here because someone looked at your scores and your record and decided you might be able to kill people from distances where you can't see their faces clearly. You're here because the Marine Corps needs people willing to do the math. Calculate how many lives you take versus how many you save. He pulled out his phone, showed them the viral video from the valley. This is me, 3 months ago, 73 kills in 40 minutes. Every one of them necessary. Every one of them someone who would have killed Marines if I hadn't killed them first. The video played. The candidates watched in silence, saw the precision, saw Miguel's first kill, saw Jack's quiet words of comfort, saw the moment when he lowered his rifle with just 15 rounds left. That video has 50 million views now. People call me a hero. They make memes. They argue on the internet about whether I should have been court-martialed or given a medal. And you know what? None of them understand what it actually felt like. Jack turned off the video. It felt like watching through a scope as human beings stopped being human and became targets. It felt like pulling a trigger and knowing that somewhere, someone's mother just lost a son, someone's wife just lost a husband, someone's kid just lost a father. 73 times in 40 minutes. He looked at each candidate. If you can't handle that weight, leave now, no shame. This isn't for everyone. But if you stay, understand that this is what you're signing up for. Not glory, not being a hero, just the long, grinding weight of carrying faces forever. No one left. After class, a young Lance Corporal approached. Sir, my dad was in that valley. He's the one who took the helmet cam video that went viral. Jack studied the kid, saw the family resemblance. What's his name? Staff Sergeant David Chen. He was with Charlie Company. I remember him. Good Marine, he okay? Yeah, he talks about you sometimes, says you saved his life. Says he'd follow you anywhere. Tell him I said hello. Tell him I'm glad he made it home. The kid hesitated. Sir, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you regret it, disobeying the orders, even though it worked out? Jack thought about the question, about the court-martial, about the 73 faces, about the reconciliation with his father and his kids, About standing in Arlington Cemetery watching his grandfather's name be cleared. No, he said finally, I don't regret it. I regret that I had to make that choice. I regret that the system forced me to choose between orders and lives. But I don't regret choosing lives. I'd make the same choice again tomorrow if I had to. Even knowing you might go to prison, even then, those Marines are alive. That matters more than my freedom, more than my career, more than anything. The kid nodded slowly. That's what my dad said you'd say. 6 months after the ceremony at Arlington, Jack got a call from his father. The old man wanted to have lunch. They met at a diner in Wyoming, the same one where Jack's grandfather used to buy him chocolate shakes. His father had brought something, a box, old and weathered. I found this cleaning out the attic. Thought you should have it. Inside the box were his grandfather's journals, dozens of them, dating back to boot camp, continuing through his deployment to Iraq, ending a few months before his death. I never read them, his father admitted. I was too angry, too convinced he was wrong to care what he had to say. But you should read them. You should know who he really was. That night, Jack started reading. His grandfather's words, his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. One entry, dated February 15th, 1991, the day after the firefight. Today I saved 40 men by disobeying a direct order. Lieutenant Reeves is furious, says I've undermined his authority, says there will be consequences. But I can't bring myself to care. Those 40 men have families, have futures, have lives they deserve to live. If the price of their lives is my career, then so be it. Some things matter more than following orders. I hope my son understands that someday. I hope he knows I didn't do this to embarrass him or to throw away our family's honor. I did it because it was right, and sometimes right is more important than easy. Jack read that entry 3 times. Then he picked up his phone and called his father. Dad, I'm reading Grandpa's journals. Yeah. He knew. He knew what it would cost, and he did it anyway. For the same reason I did. For the same reason any Marine would. Because the lives mattered more than the rules. His father's voice was thick with emotion. I wish I'd read these 30 years ago. I wish I'd known. You know now, that's what matters. They talked for an hour. About the grandfather they'd both misunderstood. About the legacy that had finally been reclaimed. About the 3 Morrisons who'd all faced the same impossible choice and all made the same decision. A year after the court-martial, Jack stood on a ridge overlooking a training range at Quantico. Below him, his students were practicing long-range shots. He watched them work, remembering when he'd been that young, that eager, that convinced he understood what he was signing up for. Miguel found him there. The kid had been promoted to corporal, was working in intelligence now, but he still visited when he could. How's fatherhood? Jack asked. Terrifying, amazing, I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. Welcome to parenthood. That never changes. Jackie said her first word yesterday. Well, more like a sound, but we're counting it. What was it? Duh. My wife swears she was trying to say daddy. Miguel smiled. I never thought I'd have this. A family, a home, being a citizen. It all seemed impossible back when I was just trying to survive and send money home to my mom. You earned it, every bit of it, because you kept me alive long enough to earn it. They stood together, watching the students shoot, the crack of rifles echoing across the valley. The same sounds Jack had been hearing for 16 years. The sounds of Marines training to make the hardest shots at the longest distances. Boss, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Not the disobeying orders part, but the killing, all 200 of them. Jack thought about the question, about the faces he still saw every night, about the therapy and the medication and the hard work of learning to carry the weight without being crushed by it. I regret that the world's a place where people like me have to exist. I regret that there are situations where the only answer is violence. I regret every single life I've taken, even the ones that needed taking. But I don't regret keeping you alive, or keeping those Marines in the valley alive, or giving my grandfather's legacy back to him. That's not really an answer. No, but it's the truth. You can regret the necessity while accepting the reality. You can carry the weight while knowing it was worth carrying. You can see the faces and honor them by being worthy of the lives you saved. Miguel nodded. Jackie's going to grow up in a country where she has opportunities I never had. She's going to go to school and college and have choices because her dad was brave enough to join the Marines and because her dad's boss was brave enough to keep him alive. You give me too much credit. You don't give yourself enough. After Miguel left, Jack stayed on the ridge watching the sunset. The same sun that set over the valley where 73 people died and 500 lived. The same sun that set over Arlington Cemetery where his grandfather's name had finally been cleared. The same sun that set over a world that needed people willing to make impossible choices and carry the weight afterward. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Dad, Jacob's soccer game is tomorrow at 10. Can you come?" Jack typed back immediately. "I'll be there, front row, wouldn't miss it." Her response came fast. "Love you, Dad." 3 words, simple, but they meant everything. Jack looked at the rifle in his hands. His grandfather's M40A1, 63 marks carved by a man who died thinking he was a disgrace. A man who'd actually been a hero. A man whose grandson had walked the same path and somehow avoided the same fate. He thought about adding marks for his own kills. 73 from the valley, 127 before that, 200 total. But he decided against it. His grandfather's 63 would be enough. A reminder of where the legacy came from, of the price paid, of the choice made. 1 shot, 1 kill. But know what you're killing for, Jack knew. He killed for the Marines beside him, for the families they'd go home to, for daughters named Jackie who'd grow up with fathers, for sons who'd watch their dads coach soccer, for the idea that good people deserve to live even when bad people wanted them dead. The sun dipped below the horizon. The students below packed up their rifles. The range fell quiet. Jack stood alone on the ridge, a teacher now instead of a shooter, a father learning to be present instead of a ghost haunting his own life. Behind him, 16 years of war, 200 faces he'd never forget, a grandfather's legacy reclaimed, a court-martial that became redemption. Ahead of him, students to teach, kids to raise, a father to reconcile with, a life to rebuild one choice at a time. The balance wasn't perfect. Maybe it never would be. But it was enough. The faces he carried were balanced by the lives he'd saved. The legacy of violence was balanced by the legacy of protection. The cost was balanced by the purpose. Jack Morrison walked down from the ridge as darkness fell. Behind him, the ghosts of 200 dead. Beside him, the presence of 500 living. Inside him, the hard-won piece of a man who'd made the right choice even when it was the hardest choice. 1 shot, 1 kill. But also, 1 choice, 1 legacy, 1 chance to pass on wisdom earned in blood and carried in silence. Tomorrow, he'd stand on a soccer field sideline and cheer for his son. He'd eat dinner with his kids and his father. He'd read his grandfather's journals and understand the man who'd walked this path before him. Tomorrow, he'd teach young Marines that being a sniper meant more than shooting straight. It meant carrying weight, making choices, living with consequences. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and face 200 faces and remind himself why each one had been necessary. But tonight, walking back to his quarters under a sky full of stars, Jack Morrison allowed himself to believe that maybe, possibly, the man he'd become was worth the cost of getting there. The rifle on his shoulder felt lighter than it had in years. The weight he carried felt more bearable. The future felt less like a burden and more like a promise. 1 shot, 1 kill. But also, 1 life, 1 legacy, 1 chance to get it right. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jack Morrison thought he just might. The end. As I researched this story, one question haunted me. What would I do? When you can see the truth through your scope, but headquarters can't see what you see. When following orders means watching your brothers die, what choice do you really have? Jack Morrison carried 200 faces for the rest of his life. His grandfather died thinking he was a disgrace. But 540 Marines went home because 2 men made the hard choice. I want to hear from you veterans out there. Have you ever faced a moment where the right thing and the lawful thing weren't the same? Share your story below.